All right. Welcome, everybody, to the 2025 XR Access Symposium. Thanks, everybody, so much for joining us here today, both in person and online. We've got a real exciting program for you this year. And I'm really looking forward to seeing some of our presenters and some of our exhibits and some great breakout discussions and a whole lot more. Let me work a button. There we go. I'm Dylan Fox, Director of Operations. Shiri?
I'm Shiri Azenkot. I'm the Director of XR Access. I'm a professor here at Cornell Tech.
And yeah, Shiri, you want to talk a little bit about what XR Access is?
Yeah, so you have all heard of XR Access, but you might not be familiar with all the things that we do. So we were founded back in 2019, founded by myself and Larry Goldberg, who's actually here today, which is great. So it was a joint venture at the time from Cornell and Yahoo. And our goal was to ensure that XR, so virtual and augmented reality technologies, will be made accessible from the start. So we see this new technology that's becoming more mainstream, virtual and augmented reality technologies. And as usual, we realized that accessibility was not being considered. So we established this initiative. The idea was to bring the key stakeholders together, researchers from academia, practitioners from industry, and also advocates, people with disabilities, the need knowers, as we like to call them, to bring them all together and to make sure that we are asking the right questions, we are doing the research to answer those questions, and this knowledge is being transferred and shared across all of these different stakeholders. So to do that, we do a variety of things. This is our flagship event, the XR Access Symposium. And Dylan, you can talk about some of the other things that we do throughout the year.
Absolutely. So our activities are pretty varied, but the biggest categories, I think, are number one, we innovate on accessibility. We have a lot of great research that we do right here at Cornell on how do we make XR accessible to folks with disabilities, particularly for us folks with low vision and blindness. We've done some amazing work, and I think we'll have some of our folks from our lab presenting here today on things like virtual reality guides, or sighted guides, AI companions, use of nonverbal communication and alternative avatars, and all kinds of things. And then we also do a lot of work in terms of education and advocacy. We talk to different universities, we talk to different tech platforms and content creators. We try to make sure that wherever people are talking about XR, they're also talking about accessibility, and vice versa. Wherever people are talking about accessibility, they're also talking about XR. Because the state of the matter right now is that there are a lot of folks in tech who just kind of don't think much about accessibility at all. It's an afterthought. And we really want to make sure that accessibility is part of that minimum viable product and that is built in from the start. And we don't end up with another format like PDF, which as anybody has tried to do accessibility remediation on a PDF will know it is probably about the fifth circle of hell. Yeah. I think before we go on, I definitely wanted to give a big thank you to our sponsors. We have the National Science Foundation and Yahoo as our two platinum sponsors today, and Meta as a gold sponsor. And without those contributions, the symposium definitely would not be possible. So thank you to them.
Thank you to our sponsors.
And then I want to give just a few conference tips here. So first of all, the Wi-Fi for today is Cornell Visitor, requires a sign-in, but should hopefully hold up under conference stress as all such Wi-Fis are tested. Second, you can join us on Slack at xraccess.org/Slack. And we have a symposium channel, which should be one of the default channels, where you can find any updates about today. It's open for discussion. We'll be posting links there as well as to the Zoom. So that is the place to be for asynchronous communication. If you're on social media, we suggest using hashtag XR Access 2025 in order to help spread the word and help us go viral. And then we also have a QR code up here that will link you to attendee information. And this is a little Google Drive that we put together that has all of the presentation and exhibit material if you want to follow along yourself. It has our breakout documents for the breakout discussions later. It has a document that has a full breakdown of our accessibility information, which I'll also go over in just a moment. And also has some maps of the center in general and of where our posters and demos are all going to be.
Yeah, and I think we're gonna put the link on Slack too, right?
Yes, it should already be on Slack.
Yeah, so the link to that Google Drive folder is also on the Slack channel.
Yes. Then additionally, in terms of accessibility here, there we go. First, I should have started with this. We do have captions available for today. If you're on the Zoom, they should be appearing automatically. But if you need them in person, then we have a QR code up right now where you can access the string text link provided by 3Play. And if anybody has challenges with any of that, please don't hesitate to post to the Slack or just to raise your hand and call it out, because we do want this to be as accessible as possible. I do apologize we weren't able to get the captions up on screen. We tried that last year, and hoo boy, was there a whole lot of technical kerfuffles that came out of it. So I think this is the best solution we found for this year. We will have, obviously we have ASL interpretation up on stage now. It's from With Direction LLC. We have all of our volunteers who are currently wearing XR Access t-shirts. So if you need anything, don't hesitate to just raise your hand and call out for a volunteer, and we'll make sure that they come to your aid. We have a quiet room upstairs. That's the boardroom 207, just to the right of the elevators. So if you ever get overstimulated, you're welcome to go hide out in there and kind of regain your composure. We have accessible restrooms, which are just outside to the right, and I'll show a map in just a moment. And we also have a guide dog relief area. So if anybody has a guide dog that needs to do their business, you just walk out the main entrance of the Verizon Center, you turn left and go down the stairs, you turn right and head downhill, keeping left to avoid the ramp back up to the graduate. And then when you hit the curb, you turn left and head across the street, and there's a nice kind of wooded or grassy area along West Loop Road.
Yeah. It's across West Loop Road, so you need to cross that street.
Right. And well, our volunteers can also help guide anybody there if they need it. Yeah, and then just to show the map and talk a little bit about where things are going to be happening today. Right now, we're here in the event space on the ground floor. If you walk outside to the lobby, that's where all of the snacks and food will be served later today. You can cut around to the right from there to get to the ADA accessible restrooms. And then there's also elevators or stairs going up to the second floor. The elevators open right up into the demo space, which is where we're going to be having our demos. That's the gallery. The quiet room is just to the right of the elevators. And then the posters are going to be down the corridor to the left. And that is also classroom 225, where we're going to be having one of the breakout sessions as well later. Okay, I think that takes care of all the boring stuff. Want to talk
Boring but necessary.
Yes. A little bit about the symposium, and then I think we can pass it off to our first speaker. So for this year's symposium, we had 58 submissions, which was, I think, a record number for us. That ended up getting boiled down into 14 talks and 27 exhibits split across the next 2 days. We had over 435 registrations, and I think a few more since I checked that last night. 192 people registered to be here in person and 243 on Zoom. So thank you all for your enthusiasm there. And those registrations included people from over 80 different organizations. We had at least 60 different universities and colleges, 15 different tech companies, including Meta and Google, and a good handful of organizations in the arts and healthcare, which is wonderful to see. now just to go over the schedule real quick. We're starting off right now with the welcome. And a few minutes, we will shift to understanding how blind and low vision users relate to and use an AI-powered guide to enhance VR accessibility. Then beyond access, meaningful accessibility in video games, and virtual reality interventions for intersectional stress reduction among Black women. Then at 10:20, we'll have our first snack break. And at 10:40, we'll be back in here for designing disability inclusive avatars, representing chronic pain through social VR, avatar movement, and appearance. Cripping up, how we're using VR to challenge ableism. Lemmings, tools for accessible gestures, and augmented reality navigation system for wheelchair users. And then at 12 o'clock, give or take, we will do a brief review of our breakout sessions and then go to lunch. Everybody's favorite part. Then at 1 o'clock, we have our exhibits. And so those are mostly going to be upstairs, as I said. And at 2:40, we will be moving into our breakout discussions. And those are going to be split, 2 here in the auditorium, 1 in the gallery, 1 in the lobby, and 1 in the classroom. And we'll go over all that. We'll have a brief snack break before coming back here at 4 o'clock for the breakout summaries, at 4:20 for XR for autistic inclusion, balancing innovation with ethics. And then at 4:40, we'll have our day 1 closing and get ready for tomorrow. Yeah, Shiri, any more words before we pass it off to our first presenter here?
I think we're very excited about all these talks. We received excellent submissions, and we feel that we really have an fascinating and diverse program for the next couple of days. So let's get started.
All right. So please give it up for Jazmin, who's going to be starting us off with understanding how blind and low vision users relate to and use an AI-powered guide to enhance VR accessibility.
Wow, you're tall. Okay. I'm going to be removing this from the stand shortly so that I can walk around and carry it with me. All right, now bear with me as I get my slides up here. Now, is there anything I should do besides just plugging it in to get my slides showing, or?
Mauricio in the back is going to swap us over in just a second.
Cool. Nice.
And one more thing, for all of our speakers, ideally we want 16 minutes presentation and about 4 minutes Q&A. And I'll be signaling you when it's almost time to switch to Q&A.
Cool. Can I have a clicker?
No, this is...
Dang it. Okay, no clicker for me. No worries. Okay, well, great. Well, in that case, I hope you guys are all excited for the start of this symposium, and I'm excited to kick us off here. Let's just dive right into it. So I'm going to begin with a statement here. Virtual reality is visually complicated. It gets even more so when we're dealing with virtual worlds that are designed for multiple users, like social VR applications, where dozens or even hundreds of different users can join the same virtual spaces and interact together. Now, in this image on screen, for example, we have 2 avatars here. One has a toaster for a head with some bunny ears on top. The other one's head has been totally replaced by a cheeseburger. They're in colorful outfits, making lively gestures and facial expressions. They're in some kind of a nightclub-like environment with dynamic lighting in the background. And there's even some interactive objects like a DJ table with a DJ in front of it here. There's a lot going on visually. And if a blind or low vision person was trying to engage in this space without being able to easily access all of these different visuals, it would be very challenging. So, how do we make such a visually complex space accessible for a blind or low vision user? Well, in our past work, we examined the sighted guide technique, which is a versatile technique used in many visually complex spaces in the physical world. The way it works is a blind or low vision person will grab onto the elbow of their sighted guide, who is then able to physically move them through different environments while providing visual interpretation and verbal feedback about everything that's going on. Now, we took sighted guidance and we translated it into social virtual reality through a technique that we called shared movement. Now, pictured on the screen here are two avatars engaged in shared movement. Little image you might recognize from the opening slides just now. The way shared movement works is when the two avatars are close enough in proximity to each other, the blind or low vision user can press a button on their controller to physically grab on to the guide avatar. And from that point on, they'll feel a haptic vibration in their controller that lets them know they're grabbing on, and the two avatars will be combined as a unit. They'll move as a unit. So wherever the guide avatar goes in the scene, whether they're walking or teleporting, the two avatars move together. Now, we developed and tested this technique in a previous paper with 16 blind and low vision participants, and we found that it was an effective way to access various kinds of information of virtual spaces. However, it also came with some limitations. Namely, it created a lot of feelings of dependence and reliance on the human guide. As one of our participants, Noah, put it, I don't think there's anything that the guide could do to make the experience feel more independent, other than if we were to replace the human guide with an AI guide. I'm not relying on a person, I am relying on software that I am telling what to do. That's the difference between asking you to read the computer screen and me using the screen reader to read the computer screen. Now, based on feedback like this from several other participants as well, we decided to try designing an AI version of our guide to bring into VR for a more independent guidance experience and to see how people would react to it. We did this following our question, what is the experience of using an AI guide in social virtual reality for blind and low vision people? And so now I'll start telling you a little bit about how we went about doing this. First, how did we create our prototype here? Well, we developed our prototype on a MetaQuest 2 inside of virtual park environments that we created in Unity. And these environments were based off of standard social VR experiences. So people had some standard social VR functions, like being able to walk, teleport, grab virtual objects. But in addition, we also mapped one of the buttons on our controller to be able to use the AI guide. And when that button was held down, the system would start recording audio from the virtual reality headset of whatever the participant was commanding or questioning of the guide. At the same time, the system would take two screenshots, one of whatever the participant was looking at, and one bird's eye view of the entire virtual environment. And these two pieces of information, the screenshots and that audio recording, were packaged together to form the query for our AI guide. This query was sent to OpenAI's large language model, GPT-4, which would then process it and give a response that we translated into audio so our blind and low vision user could hear it. Now, we doctored up this prompt a little bit as well with some guidelines we created just to make sure the response was a bit better. So for example, we told the AI guide to follow guidelines for blind and low vision visual interpretation. So remember that it's talking and describing things to someone who may not necessarily be able to see it. We also told it to describe things as though it was inside the scene, experiencing things with the questioner. And we told it to adjust its response based on the persona it was embodying. And I'll explain what a persona is really shortly. But real quick, as a final note, for any other functions that the guide had that involved actually acting on the virtual world, we wrote our own scripts for that in Unity that were selectively activated based on whatever GPT-4's response was. Now, going back to those personas, what are they? So these are different visual appearances, voices, and personalities that the AI guide can embody in order to offer different guidance experiences to users. We designed 6 of these in total, but for brevity, I'll only cover the 3 that we actually used in our study here. So starting from the left, we have our human guide. This is an androgynous, black-haired guide wearing a gray hoodie who is told to speak like a warm, friendly, but professional tour guide, kind of a standard guide. In the middle, we have our robot guide. This is a tall, shiny, silver humanoid robot who spoke in a very formal, militaristic, and robotic manner. And then finally, we have our guide dog. This is a German Shepherd breed guide dog wearing a bright red harness, and it was our friendliest guide. It was extremely chatty, very eager, and excited to help and answer questions. Now, with this implementation, our guide was able to do quite a few things. So it could do shared movement once it determined what kind of a target a user wanted to go to. It was also able to follow the user throughout the virtual scenes wherever they went, answer any visual questions they had about the scenes, and it could even add something that we called audio beacons. These are kind of like miniature audio radars, spatialized sound effects that ping from different objects the user points out in the scene so that they can follow them by sound. Now, we brought this prototype in and had it evaluated by 16 blind and low vision participants who came in for an in-person user study. They started off by doing a tutorial in VR where they learned how to use the guide with the human guide persona and learned about the VR platform in general. Then they entered one of the 2 virtual parks that we designed for the study, and they were assigned either the dog or the robot guide once per park. At first, they explored these parks on their own, just getting familiar with the layout and landmarks. But after a little while, we actually brought in 2 remote Confederates who joined the parks with them to make it a social experience. And they were told to provide tours of the parks to these Confederates. Finally, after all of this, they conducted a semi structured interview, or we conducted the interview, they gave it, on their experience. All right, so how did we go about analyzing all of this good data we collected? Well, first we collected recordings and transcripts of all of our study sessions, and we analyzed it with a 2-step coding process. So first, we did close codes for things like the tones and types of requests users made to the guide, as well as the number of responses that the guide gave back correctly to the user. And we also did open descriptive codes just about the user's experience. And to generate our findings through these codes, we did thematic analysis using affinity diagramming. Now, what were these findings? The actual interesting part of all of this. So first, how did people end up using the guide? We found primarily as a background assistant. Users almost exclusively used the guide just to fill in gaps in their knowledge when they had specific questions about the virtual world around them, or to facilitate travel when they had a specific area in mind they wanted to go. They pretty much totally ignored the guide other than that. Out of all the requests made to the guide, 60.4% were navigation requests going to specific places, and 31.4% were visual interpretation quests, asking different things about visual details. Almost all of the requests were made in the same kind of manners as well. Participants spoke in simple and direct orders only to the guide, saying things like, "Take me to the bench." A whopping 74.6% of every request sent to the guide was spoken in this very utilitarian tone. The guide was very much positioned as just a simple assistant that was there to receive orders and act on them. But how did it actually perform as an assistant? Well, we found overall that it was kind of average, but fun for people. So the guide had an accuracy rating of about 63.2%. It struggled a lot with participants who had strong accents, for example, or if participants lifted their fingers too early and sent an incomplete query to the guide, it didn't do so well. But even considering that, overall, it had kind of an average accuracy. It also received some average ratings on some of the Likert scales we asked participants to provide, like getting an average of 3.2 out of 5 points for its usability or 3.5 out of 5 points for its usefulness. But it scored very highly for joy of use or enjoyability, getting 4.1 out of 5 points. Participants really liked using the guide. They enjoyed playing around with it. And they also had some really fun behaviors in how they played with it. But we noticed that they really did this in specific situations, social situations. Almost universally, participants would become friendlier and more playful towards the guide when they were in social situations with the Confederates rather than using it on their own. And to give you an example of how big this shift was, only 2 participants used the guide's name and referred to it by name in solo situations, compared to 9 participants who used its name when they were in front of other Confederates, 6 of whom gave the guide their own unique nicknames like Buddy or Prince. They also started using gendered pronouns when talking to the guide here, calling it she or he instead of just it. And they even brought it a little bit outside of its assistant role in front of the Confederates. So, encouraging other Confederates and people to interact with the guide, bringing it more into the conversation, having other people play around with it. And I have this great exchange here from our participant Len that showcases all of these behaviors in one. So Confederate 2 asks of the robot of the guide, "Does your robot have a name or anything?" And Len replies, "No, I don't think he has a name. In my head, I call him Jerry, though." Confederate 1 then says, "Hi, Jerry." And Len very excitedly says, "Oh, let's see if he responds." And he releases a button on his controller to record and send the Confederate's greeting to the guide. The guide then replies, "Hello, how may I assist you in this park?" And Len happily says, "There you go. He said hello back. That's awesome." Now, participants weren't just friendlier with the guide in social situations, they actually role played with it. We noticed that tons of participants changed the language they used when talking to the guide, especially when praising or criticizing it when they were around other people. For example, Len referred to his guide dog as the goodest boy when it gave a response that he really liked the details of. Other participants characterized the guide's mistakes based on its appearance, which I'll give an example of after this. But something interesting we noted was that the dog role playing was way more prominent than role playing with the robot guide. Participants might be more likely to call the guide their robot or say they had a robot companion, but they didn't really change their language the same way that we saw with this dog. Now, to give an example of this changing language, we have an exchange from our participant Maritza. So Maritza was actually having some difficulties with her guide. It wasn't responding the way she wanted it to. So, for example, she told it, "We're not going anywhere. My dog is not taking me." And to the guide, she tried ordering it, "Take me to the southern gazebo." When it didn't say anything, she told the Confederates, "My dog went to sleep." Confederate 1 then says, "I mean, do we need to wake him up, poor guy?" Maritza tries again, "Take us to the southern gazebo." When it doesn't do anything, she talks to the Confederates, "I forgot to feed her. She is on strike and hungry." Now, this is all very funny and interesting, but what does this actually mean for the broader accessibility community? What do these interesting behaviors mean for our understanding of AI guides? Well, they point out some cool differences for us between human and AI guides. So, for one, most of our participants with human guides really wanted to bring the human guide more into their experience. They liked chatting with the human guide, they wanted to do more activities in the virtual world together with them. However, the AI guide we saw was only really brought selectively into the situation, specifically in social situations. So we can't really improve AI guides the same way we would with the human guide by just giving it more abilities and more access to do things in the virtual world. Rather, what we should do is lean into the kind of role playing behaviors that we saw people wanted from the AI guide. For example, a lot of our participants mentioned that they wished the guide dog would react when they tried to pet it or that they could play fetch with it. Enabling support for these kinds of playful connections would allow for a stronger AI guide experience. We also noted some advantages of having embodied accessibility assistants here. A lot of approaches to VR accessibility tend to focus on creating informative tools with audio or haptic cues that leave the accessibility system itself totally invisible. And this is completely fine, but there's a culture of personable assistance in virtual reality, like Wall-E-esque robots that you meet in tutorial games. And these assistants lean into the role-playing behaviors that we saw in our study. So why not use them for accessibility tools? For example, future research could study the different embodiment effects of various different kinds of guides, like white canes or bird guides, and see if role playing with these different kinds of guides improves the VR guidance experience overall. Now, in summary, we explored the use of an AI powered guide to enhance accessibility of social VR. And we did this by transferring our previous guidance framework of a human guide into AI. We evaluated it through a study with 16 blind and low vision participants and found some trends in the user's behaviors towards the AI guide, as well as opportunities to improve interactions with future AI guides. Thank you very much for listening to this brief talk of mine, and contact me if you have questions. My email is jc2884@cornell.edu. Thank you. Now, how much time do we have for questions? I have a schedule. Oh, amazing. All right, great. So are there any questions right now? You have 5 whole minutes for it. Yes.
I'm loud too. Hi, my name is Anne. First of all, I'm assuming you're not blind or low vision. Do you have any blind or low vision people on your staff, on your team? And why did you choose to do this?
Oh, well, thank you for that personal question. So yes, we do have blind or low vision people on the team. In fact, my advisor for this project is Shiri Azenkot, who's sitting in the front row here. And when designing our AI guidance framework and all the different pieces of this tool, we had done several participatory and co-design studies working with blind and low vision people in the NYC community to kind of figure out how to design this guide. And that was all, in the design phase process of this a long time ago. But yes, we very much involved the community through every step of this process. And as for why I was involved with this project and decided to do it, well, I'm a PhD student who came in focusing on research in VR accessibility. And I personally, I really like the idea of entertaining or enjoyable accessibility measures. I think a lot of accessibility measures tend to be like toggles or menus and just like really annoying buttons you have to press and things like that. But the guide is like a really fun tool that people actually like talking to and playing around with and messing with. So I think it's a very fun, engaging approach to accessibility, and that's why I went for it.
Actually, I think I use a guide in a lot of these games myself. And then, did they ask for different personas? Did the personas look like we're blind or low vision themselves?
So like, did the human persona look like a blind or low vision person? Oh, so the human persona, we just we took a kind of a really basic human avatar and tried to make it as androgynous as possible. Because when we got some feedback early on from different participants about designing what they looked like, we had some participants who were uncomfortable with a guide of a different gender, or like some participants who mentioned they wouldn't feel comfortable having like a female specifically guide them. So we just tried to make it like androgynous, like default as androgynous as we could. And as far as where other personas came from, we actually did this really fun remote design study where we online via like Zoom, we did design sessions about what these guides should look like, sound like, talk like, and act like, and had people like change all those different specs in this Zoom call with them. And we had this huge variety of guides that came out of that. Anything from like talking dogs and talking wolves to sandals with wings on them to indicate like Hermes, the messenger god. And one participant who asked for two crows on his shoulders because he really likes Norse mythology and Odin is cool. So we had huge variety, and we really had to narrow it down.
I'm sorry, my question had to do with the avatars themselves of the people.
Oh, of the
Did they
people who
want
use them.
themselves to look as they were blind or low vision? And
Oh, yeah, so of the participants themselves and the avatars they used. So we had just some default avatars that we had them use for the study, mostly because we didn't have enough time to buffer in like a customization period or anything where they could customize their own avatar. But a lot of participants did comment just offhandedly or in informal chats that they would love more representation in the avatars to look like someone from the blind or low vision community. Like they loved having the guide dog, for example, because they were like, this makes me look like a blind person while I'm in VR. So they really liked the guide dog's appearance. So yeah, there was a desire for that. We didn't have time to fit it in our study. Let's see.
Thank you so much for your presentation today. It was very insightful. Myself, I'm a deaf individual, and so I use two different kinds of accommodations in my daily life. One being captions, which I don't want to say that I have a relationship with captions. I may want my captions to be more tech focused or more compatible to my area of study, but more than that, there isn't much of a relationship using captions. However, that changes when you're using an interpreter. You develop a rapport with your interpreter, my tone, my style of speech, what information I cherish, and are able to, quote unquote, customize your interpreter that way. Now, with blind individuals and their guide dogs, I'm not very well versed in that area, but I do have a hearing friend who shared that the relationship with their guide dog is very important. They train the dog to understand what is important to the user and develop that information over time through feedback, through different methods of teaching, and being able to have the dog provide the human the best experience. Now, different folks have maybe similar disabilities, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have preferred the same preferences. And so over time and through experience, that relationship is very important when it comes to access. And so my question for you is, Did you have that feedback loop throughout your design where the user was able to show their preferences? Did that come across in the prototype, and what are the implications for that in the long run?
Yeah, great question. So, actually, as a part of those design studies that we mentioned earlier, participants did give all their different preferences for how they wanted information to be shared, and we had a really difficult time trying to find a global sort of guideline that we could follow for that. Since in the end, we had to have some version of this AI guide to start with as a baseline, and not a lot of time to customize it individually to every single person for every single session. So that's kind of what guided our blind and low vision visual interpretation guidelines that I mentioned earlier. It was this feedback from the community during the design process of what kinds of information they wanted the guide to provide. Some of the things that actually stuck and came out of that were things like having the guide mention cardinal directions as often as possible, using north, south, east, and west, as opposed to like left, right, a little in front. Um, but it was difficult to try and personalize how the guide provided guidance and how it spoke to each individual person. And that was part of the reasoning behind doing personas with the AI guide, since the AI guide, it's difficult to make it like form a relationship with someone, but we can give it very different guidance styles right off the bat in just telling it how to speak and telling it to speak in different ways. So we kind of tried to give different guidance experiences in the study through the personas to see if people had one that they really meshed with, or at least hopefully provide them with some kind of guidance style that maybe they did like, even if we couldn't quite personalize it to them. But yeah, the hope would be going forward that we might be able to do more of that personalization, or that an AI guide could be personalized very closely to someone's needs. Yes, sounds good. If anyone does have other lingering questions, feel
Hello?
free to email me.
Wait, oh, okay.
Oh, oh, yes, sorry. I think we have to move on for time.
Okay.
Do you want this here?
I'll take it. Yeah. Let's thank Jazmin again. That was an amazing talk. All right. Moment of truth, connecting the AV. So I came with a clicker, but I couldn't get it. I couldn't raise my hand in time for Jazmin. All right. Okay, excellent. Let me hit play. Beautiful. Test my clicker. Wonderful. Okay, so here we go. My name is Brian Smith, and I'm a professor at Columbia University. I'd like to start with a question. Has anyone ever encountered an accessibility tool or feature that was well-intentioned, or perhaps at least intended to correctly check a box, but somehow missed the mark on providing meaningful accessibility? Is that anyone here by any chance? Okay, we've all seen this, right? It's super common. And sometimes the accessibility flaws or problems are obvious. So, famous case in point for blind and low vision folks, these web accessibility overlays that we see on the internet. Here I'm just showing a random website, and on the top right, there's this little widget that gets added post facto, after the fact, to retroactively make this website quote unquote accessible. If you were to click this widget with a screen reader or whatnot, it introduces this really complicated menu, and many of us have encountered these things. They don't really work, even though they're well-intentioned, and so that makes sense. But other times, it's not always clear why an accessibility feature isn't working. So for example, a product that I admire a lot is the smart cane called WeWalk. And here I'm showing a person using this smart cane. It's like a white cane, but it has a ultrasound sensor at the very tip of the cane so that it can actually alert the user of any obstacles within 1 meter of them, which is really awesome. But the feedback that I've gotten, at least on this initial version,
WeWalk just came out with a V2 that I think has fixed this issue, and I hear it's really awesome. With this initial version is that even though it has these awesome technological features, it when you hit the cane against different obstacles, it actually doesn't make the same sound as a regular white cane. And so it kind of failed for at least the folks at Helen Keller Services for the Blind that I was talking to in providing that sort of meaningful transition to a more intelligent white cane. And so it's not always clear, this is a challenge, what kinds of accessibility tools or features are going to offer meaningful improvements and which ones are not. And so the question is, what makes an accessibility tool meaningful as opposed to purely functional? What does it take to create something that actually makes a difference? So this is a question that I've been exploring in my own career for years, ever since I started as a PhD student. And the things that I've discovered, at least in the realm of making video games and virtual worlds accessible to blind and low vision people, the things that I've discovered have completely transformed the way that I think about accessibility and the thought process that I use when designing assistive tools. So I'm really happy to share some of those, anecdotes and some of those stories with you. Thanks a lot for having me, and it's really great to be here. Because I love working together with industry, with other folks to really make a difference, and so that the work that we do doesn't just stay in the lab. So I'm going to show two projects that I'm known for at this point in accessibility. The first being what's called the Racing Auditory Display. That's a project for making racing games, video games, accessible to blind and low vision folks so that they can play not just purpose-built racing games for them, but rather any existing racing game. How can you actually allow blind folks to play any existing racing game? So this project was recently, just a couple years ago, incorporated into Forza Motorsport by Microsoft Xbox Game Studios as the blind driving assist mode. And that game won the 2023 Game Award, which is the Academy Award for video games for innovation and accessibility. So we'll talk about that. And then the other project that I'd like to talk about is a project called Surveyor. And so this is another game accessibility tool, which makes it possible for blind and low vision folks to explore within 3D game worlds and actually find secrets and hidden nooks and crannies themselves, discover things themselves instead of always having to be guided. And so this recently, just this past year, in February, won the Game Accessibility Conference Award for Best Academic Research. And it's the same insight that actually powers both of these projects. And it's something that has really inspired me in our work going forward. So anyways, we'll get into it. It started with a YouTube video. As a PhD student, I got tired of working on my dissertation. I was on YouTube, and I'm a gamer. And so I encountered this, I'm usually not a big fan of the YouTube recommendation algorithm. It did me solid this time. It actually showed me a video by a teenager at the time whose name is Terry Garrett. And he goes by True Blind Gaming on YouTube. And he was playing a Zelda game, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, which is a classic. And as a little kid, I struggled in that game. This picture is showing the very first dungeon, Terry actually playing the first dungeon, which is pretty tricky. And Terry is blind, and he lost his vision, I want to say around like age 10 or so. And ever since he lost his vision, he had always wanted to play video games again. And so he tried again and again and again and kept creating all of these tricks and tactics for himself. So for example, he'd whack his sword against the wall, and then when he hears that it makes a different sound, oh, that means that's a doorway and not a wall. All of these little tricks to make it possible for him to beat the game. After, I want to say at least a year of trying this, he actually beat the first dungeon of Zelda, of Ocarina of Time. And then later he beat the entire game, which was just completely inspiring. And so games were important to me growing up. They were definitely an escape. And to see the lengths that people go through just to have some kind of access to video games really motivated me as a researcher. And so then I kept thinking, so it actually seemed like a tractable problem, because a lot of what's interesting about games, challenge, discovery, and even like fellowship and playing multiplayer, you don't necessarily need graphics for that. So it really should be possible to make these things accessible. And so I really geeked out on this. I went to, now I'm showing a website called audiogames.net, and played a whole bunch of audio games, which are games made specifically for people who are blind. I played these things, and by and large, what I discovered was that the way that games are typically made accessible, it's kind of like the web accessibility overlay story again. It's trying to just provide information to people without really understanding what matters for the gameplay and the experience. So for example, an adventure game such as Zelda, this is a newer Zelda, not Ocarina of Time, this is Breath of the Wild. Here I'm showing the main character on a grassy hill, freely exploring and looking around in a giant open world environment. So a lot of freedom, a lot of exploration. The way that these are made accessible is typically by, okay, what objects are around the player, and can we actually just give the player a menu that shows all of those different objects? The player can just choose one, and we'll just guide the player. We'll just lead them to that object, or maybe even warp them there. And for racing games, the way that those are typically made accessible is you just tell the player when to turn. Turn left, right, right again, left. And the player has to sort of react to that. And so in the case of these adventure games, the game world that the blind player gets to experience looks like the following. It's just a list. So here I'm just showing a list of 4 objects in the player's vicinity. Bush, coordinates 40, 95. You click down, tree, coordinates 60, 52. Down again, climbable wall, coordinates 104, 20. And this is the experience playing Zelda. And it clearly doesn't, it's clearly not, it doesn't have as much agency and freedom and choice, meaningful choices as sighted players take for granted. And so that, so even though the information is there technically, the experience is not. And so that was the turning point for me. What really matters is experience. And what's so different about experience compared to information? Well, it's the element of time, the meaningful choices that players are making from moment to moment in time. And so if we want to preserve an experience, we have to make sure that blind and low vision players, or any player, actually gets to make the same meaningful choices from moment to moment in time. And so that approach has actually informed a lot of the 2 projects that I'll show you. So the problem with the status quo is that the information is accessible, but the experience is not. And so I posit here that meaningful accessibility is really about access to the experience and not just the information. And so let me show you what I mean by that. So first we'll talk about the racing auditory display that was behind the blind driving assist mode in Forza. And so this project, when thinking about how do we make racing games accessible and preserve the experience of racing, the choices that, let's say, a sighted player gets to make on whether to cut a corner, go fast or slow down to take it easier, what are they doing? Well, you have to think about meaningful choices over time. Games are about meaningful choices. And so here I'm showing a racetrack, and a car is about to enter an S turn, a chicane, which is a right followed by a left. And if you think about what we actually analyzed a ton of screen recordings of people driving around in racing games. And we figured out that actually there are really 2 pieces of information that matter to players from moment to moment: how the car is positioned on the racetrack and the nature of upcoming turns. And so instead of trying to convey all available information, if we could just give those 2 pieces of information, but in real time, so that we preserve the speed and the pace of racing, then we can still make the experience feel like racing, so that players get to make the same meaningful choices. So we had 2 audio cues, and I won't get into them so much, but one is the sound slider, which communicates the positioning of the car on the racetrack. And the second is the turn indicator system, which communicates the nature of upcoming turns. And if folks want to hear a video demo or whatever, I'm happy to show a little bit later. But I wanted to say that our mean lap times by making this possible, blind folks were actually able to race around the track with similar lap times to casual sighted players, and way faster than if they were, just being bossed around, told which way to turn and when. I'll skip this slide, and I want to get into this question about exploration and discovery. How do we facilitate that, right? So how do we move away from providing, this menu of, bush, tree, climbable wall? Well, that was a question that we examined in our project Surveyor, which is about giving players a sense of exploration and discovery. And so to make that possible, when thinking about the experience and the choices that players are making from moment to moment, here I'm showing a video of a sighted player actually looking around a wall, around a corner, to discover a key on the other side. What matters is the ability to look around and the ability to remember where you've looked and where you've explored. And so we facilitate that technologically. First, we give people the ability to look around, and here I'm showing a blind player actually looking around them 360 in the environment by tilting the right analog stick of their controller, which normally controls the game's camera, and now it's an instrument for looking around. As they look around, we track where they've looked. So those places that they've looked light up as red now. And then there are some empty spots still where they haven't looked, such as places behind the wall. And so our system, Surveyor, actually scaffolds the exploration process by saying like, oh, hey, here's this, just gonna show another picture here. Here's this edge. I'll just show this picture here. Just skip ahead a little bit. There's an edge here, which is the cusp of the unknown. You haven't looked over here yet. And we can guide them just to that location so that they say, okay, now you're in a new place, and you can look around with freedom and agency from there and discover these things for yourself. So that's Surveyor. And with Surveyor, we actually got a lot of really good feedback about like, wow, I never knew that games were about finding things. And that was a first for us. So I'll close, this is my last slide here, with some parting thoughts. For me, I guess what I learned from these two projects that I'm taking forward with me is the importance of thinking about the moment-to-moment experience that a player, should be having in terms of the choices that they're making, rather than purely, the total information content. And so I showed you racing games, I showed you some exploration, adventure games, but there's still a whole bunch of video game types that we haven't been able to tackle. Platforming games like Mario, fighting games, things like that, even puzzle games. So there's a lot of work to be done to create these building blocks for accessibility. But I'm really excited to have more conversations around here and to start figuring this stuff out together. So with that, thank you so much. I'm happy to show people videos and demos and things like that if you'd like. But thanks for having me, and happy to take questions. Oh.
So I'm not sure if you mentioned this or if I missed it. Were there any blind individuals on your team?
Yes. Yeah, we regularly have blind folks in the lab, and including over the summer, thanks to our partnerships with Helen Keller Services for the Blind and Visions. Both of those organizations are headquartered here in New York.
And I wanted to clarify, are their roles on your team more collaborators, researchers themselves, or acting as consultants?
These were co-authors. And some of them started as consultants or, co-designers, where we were really learning a lot from them. But then they had desks in the lab. They became co-authors on actually all of these papers that you saw here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Hi. I have two questions. The first one is a broader one and then a more specific one, but I'll keep them short. The broader question is, with the insight that accessibility comes from meaningful choices moment to moment, was this part of your initial hypothesis or something that developed through your co-design process?
How did I discover the moment-to-moment thing?
Yeah, was this part of
Essentially.
your initial hypothesis, or did you already have thoughts that meaningful moments or choices were important?
I've always been interested in games, and in the world of game design, experience matters a lot. So I had a hunch that there was something about player experience that folks in the research community weren't taking, paying enough attention to. But then it was when I really got into watching, hours of these screen recordings, did I realize that there is actually a common pattern here, and that players feel like they're having agency, but they're all acting like human beings. And it's those moment-to-moment decisions that matter.
And then my more specific question is, did you look into interstitial moments at all, like the moments that happen between the moments, if that makes sense? So from one meaningful moment to the other, the transition period, were there any insights about that?
Yeah, cadence matters, and breathing, breathing room matters. If you play Resident Evil, they're like really intense, scary times, and then there's a lot of slow and quiet, and even like kind of goofy, moments in between. That all matters to the experience. And so when you look at the moment-to-moment level, or at that granular level, that also includes those interstitial moments. Those are absolutely important.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Did you have a chance to experiment with haptic feedback at all?
Yes, we actually, this was fun. We actually took apart some PlayStation DualShock controllers and changed some different types of rumble motors around. We played with that. There were two problems that we encountered. One was latency in providing the feedback. And for video games and even just for racing games, it was too slow to make a difference. And then two was that even when we replaced the rumble motors with like much smaller ones that are more local, that offer more localized haptic feedback, people still confused the two. So if it was the left one that went off, there were a lot of times that they thought it was the right one or just couldn't tell. And so we leaned on audio a little bit more, but haptics are important. Yeah, thanks for the question. Okay. All right, thank you.
This is forward and this is back.
Does that work? Hello. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. I also wanted to thank the organizers for having me. My name is Dr. Judite Blanc, Assistant Professor of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the University of Miami, Miller School of Medicine, where I created my own lab to, forward. Okay, so I'm just gonna continue without this. Yeah, so at the University of Miami, I am the founding director of a lab called the Holistic Families Lab, with the goal to apply innovative ethnographic as well as integrative tools to tackle and address unique stress responses among marginalized, disenfranchised group, including underrepresented and families, women, and children. Okay, maybe. Okay, finally. Okay, so in doing so, I lead some major projects, significant projects I wanted to mention this morning, particularly the one that I'm presenting, the Realis Women Study, which is an NIH-funded clinical trial which focus on a virtual reality for stress reduction, resilience and enhancement, and blood pressure management among Black women. I also co-lead two perinatal health clinical trial. The first one is the Nurturing Mom, which use actually a virtual reality for pregnancy-related education and stress reduction among perinatal women of color, as well as the Cocoon Mom Study Project, which is also an NIH-funded clinical trial. In that project, we leverage culturally tailored platform for respectful maternal care among Black women. Before I dive into my research, the research that I wanted, that I'm presenting today, because today I'm not talking about nurturing mom, but it's gonna be uniquely about realist women. I wanted to acknowledge the mentorship team at the University of Miami who is guiding me for that project. Firstly, we have Azizi Seixas, Mewid Maloney, Dr. Alberto Ramos, Dr. Girardin Jean-Louis, as well as Dr. Desbois Jones. When it comes to the project, of course, before I share with you findings, I will insist on why a virtual reality intervention is necessary and innovative to reduce stress among Black women. And then I will dive into the objective. I will present the design of the project. And at the end, some word of discussion. All right. So why Black women? Why testing a virtual reality base for stress reduction among Black women? It's because this is a population that is frequently faced by cumulative stresses such as economic hardship, caregiver burden, racial discrimination, and gender bias that contribute to mental health challenges, cardiovascular disease risk, sleep health issues, and also and among others. For example, we know that mobile health tools have been developed. Many digital interventions do not adequately address the specific needs, particularly mental health needs of diverse Black women. Therefore, effective and equitable solutions must be grounded in their lived experiences as well as their cultural contexts. All right. So this project has two major aims. The first aim was to conduct a qualitative survey. That qualitative survey, the goal was to really to sit down with a diverse pool of Black women for focus group, to exactly 16 of them, as well as conducting individual interview to explore their struggle as Black women in America, and also gather their definition of resilience, their experience with cardiovascular health, as well as their perception of the use of digital solutions, including immersive technology among Black women. And the second goal was to develop a randomized clinical control trial with a virtual reality-based stress reduction to test the feasibility, acceptability, and patient satisfaction among a diverse pool of Black women in South Florida. So here, okay, so you have the study design. Those are all the steps, right? And actually on your right side, you have all the materials that I'm using to gather data for the primary outcomes as well as secondary outcomes. You have an ABP monitor for me to gather 24 hours blood pressure data. You also have an actigraph for the sleep health, as well as the virtual reality headset. Now, so where we are with that project between, so it's part of, as I mentioned, it's part of a larger NIH-funded career development award that I received. And this project was launched at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine last year. And I already started with the qualitative phase. So in December, I sat down with a diverse pool of Black women, 16 of them. We discussed all the qualitative research question. And in March 2025, I sat down with 12 of them for in-depth interviews. And in terms of screening, so in order for me to be able to gather qualitative data for that project, I had to screen about 84 women across America. And we conducted the thematic analysis in March. And this is what came out of that qualitative phase. So as you can see, six major themes emerge from that qualitative phase of the clinical trial. So there was a lot of personal loss, right? And that started when, when they were early in their childhood. And systemic challenges, particularly with the current political climate. They complain a lot about challenges at the workplace. And of course, they had their own, although they were in agreement with the resilience scale that I used to discuss with them about resiliency, but they also had their own definition of that concept. When it comes to the superwoman schema, so view of the strong superwoman schema varied. For some, it served as a source of pride and strength. For others, it represented an unrealistic and burdensome societal expectation. And last but not least, the role of technology and self-care among Black women. So here, this is where I wanted to take some time to explain their views, their representation, what they think are barriers. As you can see, there is definitely a variation in terms of the experience, barriers those Black women reported during those interviews. As you can, for example, there is this 59 years old political canvasser. She has never used technology for health at all. My daughter said, I need to go to take computer classes, right? And the younger they are, the more likely they were to have experience not only with the digital solutions, but also with virtual reality. Benefits. So this is from a research associate, 21 years old, the research associate. She said, definitely an escape. I'm very active, like I love to just get up and do things. I think that would be a good thing. So she was answering to the question, what could be the potential benefit of using VR for stress reduction among Black women? So she thinks that would be good, especially if I'm studying or whatever. If I do like I like to take my break and do things that completely unrelated to MCAT. The MCAT, for those of you who are in healthcare, it's that medical exam that someone with a bachelor's degree you have to take in order to go to med school. So yeah, I think it will be good as far as I'm having an escape. That's not that you're active. You're actually physically moving around. They are open to using VR. This is from a warehouse worker, a 30 years old warehouse worker. That would be like meditation or something of that sort. Yeah, I'll be open to that. They also provided advice for VR program. That would be, and that's the same, I have a quote from the same warehouse worker. In terms of barriers that they see for the implementation of virtual reality for stress reduction among diverse Black women, I think an obstacle would be the promotion of it. Like maybe everybody's not aware as it's out there. That's like obstacle. And they also discuss the expense, the tech literacy, as well as physical discomfort. All right. Based on, so this discussion really, this is, I was able to develop those conclusions, not only based on those preliminary data that I gathered from the Realist Women, but also it's based on the Nurturing Mom project, which is also similar to the Realist Women clinical trial that I was a part of at the University of Miami. So what I noticed is that among Black women, among perinatal women of color, the portability and on-demand nature of virtual reality-based intervention make them a valuable asset. In these communities, transportation challenges, cultural barriers, and the stigma surrounding mental health can significantly hinder access to quality mental health services. Um, those qualitative findings that I just discussed with you, they are currently informing the development of a culturally responsive prototype, virtual reality prototype for my clinical trial, because I'm still in the qualitative phase. The actual intervention is yet to be developed. Et voilà. So I'll be presenting a poster, and also you may get the chance to actually see what the Nurture VR look like to pregnant women, as well as one of the potential virtual reality for stress reduction that I'm considering for that intervention, and that this is happening today between 1 and 2:40 p.m. and tomorrow between 10:10 and 4:40 a.m. Question, comment, welcome. Thank you.
Hi, a question to, first of all, for the prototype, I don't know if you've seen it, the VR headset for black hair. Do you know about that?
No,
there was
but
a
I'm
woman-
glad to
okay.
explore it.
Okay, so a woman's already made it. So it's already been designed and it's out there.
Okay, so if you could share
Yeah, I will.
the link, that
Yeah,
would be
yeah.
great. Yes.
And also just thinking about VR and pregnant women and also women with children. How could you do that when your VR headset, you can't actually see the children sometime unless you have the viewer on? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Basically, the Meta headset does have a camera. You can definitely see the environment, but I also remember one of those women, perinatal women that I interviewed. They also mentioned that that was a little bit of a challenge, but at the same time, I also received some feedback where they said, but that's the beauty of that program. It's because you can do it anytime. That means if your child is sleeping, right, at any time. So they also notice that the on-demand nature, the fact that you can do it at night, made it truly a valuable asset for that kind of escape that they need. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There we go. Brian Smith, Columbia University. Thank you so much. This was moving. My question, was about what you said about loss and dealing with loss. This, I guess, this is a difficult question. I don't know the answer to this, but I was wondering if you had any insights as to how VR could help with loss, as opposed to, just websites, smartphone apps, things like that.
Yeah, that's a great question. This is basically like feedback I gathered from those women. I believe the fact that the fact that when you are using the VR and you have that simulation, right? You are removed from the external world, and that's exactly why I love this kind of program so much, because sometimes the real world can be so stressful, so hard, so heavy to bear. So if you get that chance to be transported into another world, and where you can actually, and I'm so glad that now we can include AI, we can ask questions, because I also had that feedback from those women. They wanted interactive experience instead of just watching videos. So I do believe, because we can invent stuff, and maybe that's a question, that's an idea for me, because I'm not just interested in the validation, the clinical effectiveness of virtual reality, but I'm also interested in developing my own, and something that is tailored based on the singularity, the unique experience of each population. So this is probably, right, something food for thought. Design us to think of designing virtual reality for people grieving loss. Yeah. Any other question before the break? Oh yes, there's one.
Yeah, this project that what you're working on is really great. That for usually that for let's say minority and women's the need for care. And I first question I'm wondering that what kind of therapical methodology you're applying for your project.
Kind of.
Therapy methodology that you are applying for your project. That's
Okay.
for yeah.
Yeah, so basically for that, for the project, the virtual reality I was considering includes CBT, cognitive behavioral framework, breathing. They teach you about the relationship between stress and your behavior, stress and your emotion. So from a mental health perspective, that's what I'm using. And then from a clinical trial, this is like level 1, right? It's an open label project where we won't be completely blinded. So I'm just going slow. This is really a pilot. I'm not yet at the level of CT3 or CT4. The clinical trial I'm envisioning is to compare, for example, the effectiveness, pre and post changes in stress reduction from a group of 30 Black women exposed to the virtual reality for 8 weeks, as opposed to a control group exposed to who will receive only American Heart Association brochure, education on stress, mental health, sleep, and cardiovascular cardiovascular health.
Okay, thank you for sharing. And the second question, not this question, but there was some of the projects that actually using the some of the role playing game or experiences that which is another Brian just mentioned for how this experience will carried. That there was an some, the MIT Reality Hack, that hackathon, the one of the project, the caregiver, that is a kind of project that could be in a very informational that you
Yes.
can just take a look. That
Of
will
course,
share
yeah.
later. Yes.
I'm definitely here for that. I came to really explore, learn, and see whether I can, instead of using the actual CBT, and because I'm definitely interested in making this as diverse as possible. I mentioned diverse Black women. I did have some women with mental health challenges, but the other, physical disability, I'm not yet there yet. And so I'm here for that. Thank you for the suggestion.
All right. Well, I think with that, we are just about at break. First, a hand for Dr. Blanc here. Everybody, welcome back. I hope y'all had a good break, got some snacks. We're going to start off the second part of the morning here with Ria and designing disability inclusive avatars representing chronic pain through social VR avatar movement and appearance. So Ria, take it away.
Hello. Thank you, Dylan. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Ria, and I am a PhD candidate at Cornell University's Department of Communication, entering my 4th year. Today, I am very excited to share with you the full, complete study that is the second phase of a collaboration between Cornell Tech's Enhancing Ability Lab and Cornell University's Ithaca campus's Cornell Virtual Embodiment Lab. And today I will be presenting work, as Dylan mentioned, that focuses on how we can incorporate disability signifiers into avatars, specifically through movement and appearance. All right, so let's start off with the big picture. How do we represent disability in virtual worlds? Now, virtual reality can be quite broad and can mean many things, so here we're going to scope it to focus on immersive headset-based VR. Now, what we know about social VR worlds is that avatars mediate many of the social interactions that users have there. So it means that customization libraries determine which identities get to be represented in social encounters. And so we also know that VR affordances can transcend the physical world. So some of the popular mechanisms for users is flying, teleporting. I even had a user in a study talk about how they really enjoyed embodying a cat and perceiving the world from its eye level. So there are many ways to experience the joyful affordances of VR as well. So let's talk about disability representation in VR more broadly. So is everyone familiar with Second Life? Are people generally? Okay, great. But Second Life was a desktop-based VR platform. So when Second Life was built out, there were a lot more mechanisms for representing disability. They even had these disability nightclubs where users would dance around the dance floor in wheelchairs, or there would be guide dogs lounging underneath the tables. So there was a lot of that customization already in place. But when we made the transition to immersive virtual reality platforms, some of that progress was lost, and we ended up sort of back at this base level of less inclusive avatar representations. And so there was a study in 2022 by Zhang et al., and they focused on talking with people who have visible disabilities and use social VR platforms. And they asked them, well, how do you want to be represented? Is there any aspect of your disability identity that you would like to be transformed into virtual worlds? And they said, yes, assistive technologies. And then from about 2022 to 2024, I actually collaborated with the author of that paper and a student in Shiri Azenkot's lab. And we ran a study that focused on invisible disabilities. So disabilities that don't necessarily have visible signifiers like assistive technology. And what we found there is that context matters. It's very important whether you're in a social, a work setting, some other environment, whether you're around strangers or families or friends. People sort of had different interpretations of their levels of comfortability sharing about disability. We also found this distinction between implicit and explicit disability signifiers. So there were some explicit ones like t-shirt graphics, or someone wanted to hold a giant spoon to signify spoon theory. Which is basically the idea that some people with chronic illnesses might experience reduced levels of energy during a flare-up, and so that you can count your energy on spoons that you can allocate to different tasks. So that was more on the explicit side. Or a dynamic energy bar that would float above an avatar's head and indicate a level of energy for social interaction, sort of a social battery. And then there were more implicit ones. So we had a participant who talked about how he was interested in maybe, well, he could have earbuds on his avatar because in the physical world, he uses headphones. But in the virtual world, he would be interested in maybe having something slightly different that represents masking to him, since he doesn't share it with anyone in the physical world and doesn't really want it to be explicit in the virtual world either. So we had sort of a range of comfortability with disclosure. So that leads us to what has yet to be explored and the present study. So the present study focused on chronic pain conditions specifically because historically studies in VR have been more focused on therapeutic applications, so reducing experiences of pain. But we were also interested in understanding whether there is an identity component to experiences of pain, especially given that it can transform movement in chronic pain conditions. So we sort of zoomed in the scope there, and we're interested in identity and disclosure. And we were also interested in moving beyond appearance, which has been the focus of many of the studies thus far, still incorporating it because it is an important part of the avatar, but also focusing on movement and thinking about embodied manifestations of identity. This is something that a couple of our participants had alluded to in the prior study, that they wanted to understand how behavior could represent their identities. So we thought we would expand there. So, in terms of the methods, we conducted semi-structured interviews with 19 people who have chronic pain conditions, such as arthritis, Crohn's disease, and endometriosis. We had a 3-part procedure. So in the first part, we were interested in understanding their daily lived experiences of pain. In the second part, we took them through creating an avatar and immersing them in a VR world so they could embody that avatar. And then in the third part of the procedure, we took them through a Mixamo movement library activity to help them visualize and brainstorm more movement options. So, to go a little bit more in depth into each component of the study, we began with understanding the location of their pain, what triggers and worsens it, what alleviates it, how perceptible they perceive it to be to others, and if it has any impact on their movement or other aspects of their appearance and behavior. We were also interested in how they manipulate and respond to their pain in daily life. So, if there's anything they do, if they sit, if they go to physical therapy, the different ways that they might try to engage with it or disengage with it. And so in the second part of the study, we had them create a Ready Player Me avatar, which is integrated into Spatial, which is a popular platform. And then we immersed them in their avatar that they just created in the study. And so on the screen is a screenshot of the very basic spatial environment that we used. There is an avatar sitting in a house that has sort of large circular windows throughout it, and it is filled with furniture. And this is one, and behind it is a flowing waterfall. And this is an environment that anyone who uses spatial can access. It's sort of a home template. But the one customization we made was sort of floating next to the avatar, there is a mirror. And when we would ask participants questions about why they decided to customize their avatars as they did, and what maybe was missing that they would like to explore in future, we had them position themselves in front of the mirror so they could be looking directly at the customizations they had made. But that was the only way that we changed the environment. And then in the third part, we took them through a movement library activity. On the screen is a screenshot of an avatar who is paused but mid-motion running. And we asked participants to consider different social contexts. So social contexts around friends and family, around strangers, classroom environments, work environments, and to think about how they would like to represent the various experiences of movement that they have in their daily lives. And so we had several findings that I will highlight today. The first is that pain communication preferences result from stigma. So this fear of being a burden or a buzzkill to their friends and family and the people around them if they disclosed. And they also spoke of gender and cultural norms. So there was one participant who said, well, in VR, my hope is that we would be able to transcend the norms that we have in the physical world that men aren't supposed to show pain. I would like to show my pain. We also had a participant who said she was actually more interested in the makeup than anything else, because in her culture, if she were to go out into public and friends or family would see her and she would look not fully put together, she would be subject to so many questions trying to get, are you okay? Are you unhealthy? Are you sick? And she really wanted to just avoid those questions, not have to worry about disclosing, and keep to herself. So she liked the idea of being able to have her avatar always made up in the virtual world to sort of curtail those conversations before they begin. Then there was interest in sort of getting at the invisibility spectrum. So there were questions of, well, how do I represent something that's invisible? But there were also people who talked about, you know, my movement is a part of me. My chronic pain impacts my movement. It's visible. And I want that to be on my avatar because it's just ingrained in who I am as I move through the world. Then there was context. So as I mentioned, friends versus family versus strangers. Some people were like, I'll show my friends, I won't show my family. Some people said, I'll show my friends and family, not strangers. And then some people were like, well, if I'm gonna be in a VR class session, I'd wanna be able to match the postures of the people around me. And they wanted some sort of mechanism for that. And then some people, especially in the movement library activity, were really interested in metaphorical movements. So these were things like planking. There was one participant who had stomach pain, and he said, well, that's about how it feels. And so he wanted to represent it that way as he was communicating it to us. Then there was a female participant who said she imagined her pain felt like a kick to the groin, was not familiar with the sensation, but she assumed that that was sort of a way to communicate it. So some people did rely on those components too, like using metaphor to communicate through the library. And in the second part of the findings, it can sort of be split into two questions. The first is pain, part of disability identity. And so it was split. Some people said, yes, it's part of my uniqueness. It should not be erased. Posture is an extension of my personality and others. Some people thought it was distinct from their identities, and they said it's something that happens to them rather than is something that is a part of them. Then there were also some temporal motivations for representing identity. So there were some people who really focused on their past self. So talking about nostalgia. There were a couple of participants who actually altered their clothes or appearances. So we had one participant who chose sort of a boarding school, like a school type uniform. And he said, well, I wasn't really looking for anything in particular, but when I saw this, it reminded me of when I had just been diagnosed with my chronic pain condition. And it was a very key moment in my self-development journey. And I wanted to capture that in an avatar. So that was already baked in. Then there was also another participant who found a ponytail. She's like, I haven't had a ponytail in years, but I was really interested in this because it was also a key moment for her when she was experiencing her diagnosis process. She wanted to incorporate that into her representation. So some people were motivated by nostalgia. Other people were interested in representing their present self as one-to-one as possible because they saw it as a source of connection with the self to the avatar and as a way to represent themselves as authentically as possible. Then there were people who were interested in engaging with their future and alternate selves. So some people wanted to explore what they would look like when they were older. Some people wanted to age themselves up or make themselves taller. There was one participant who wanted to feel like his avatar looked older and taller because his chronic pain condition had actually stunted his growth due to food malabsorption. And so he was really interested in exploring, okay, well, what would it have been like if I was able to imagine this version of myself. Then there were other people who were interested in escapism. So using those fantastical affordances I talked about earlier, or just experiencing the absence of pain in the virtual world. And then lastly, we found that it's important to translate physical world self-accommodations into virtual worlds. So there are a number of movement-based self-accommodations people will make in their daily lives. So one participant always avoids jumping. She avoids any sort of movement that could jostle her back. And when she was exploring the world, she kept brushing the A button, which would make her avatar jump. And she would full body tense up, and it was really uncomfortable for her. And she was like, can we just remove this? Or like, let me swap it out or something else. So it's important to be able to incorporate physical self-accommodations into virtual platforms, even for comfortability of embodiment. Then there were some people who were interested in using their friends as self-accommodation as they do in the physical world. They might lean on someone for support in between classes as they're navigating. So they were interested in translating that into the virtual. And then there were also a couple of participants who talked about clothing as a self-accommodation. So thinking about cut, texture, style. As they were looking through the avatar customization library, they felt a little bit uncomfortable because they felt that they wouldn't wear any of these textures in the physical world, knowing that it would brush up with their chronic pain and aggravate it. So I'll conclude with some key design takeaways. The first is that it is important to translate physical self-accommodations based in movement into virtual avatars as a form of accessibility. It's important to have more accessible clothing options, cuts, styles, textures, a diverse array for people to choose from. There should be an option to swap out the default movement triggered by pressing buttons like the A button. There was some interest in toggling for customizability versus standard movement and being able to sort of fluctuate between the two, which we understand there are design constraints around that. So thinking about that. And then also that ability to blend in with others' movement in certain settings while balancing that with concerns about people using it as a tool for harassment. So sort of balancing the identity expression versus the safety protocols that have to be built into these worlds. But thank you. Happy to take any questions.
I think we have time for just one or two questions. And Meg, if you want to get started setting up.
I was just curious because, there's been a lot of work done with, how virtual reality can actually be really helpful at acting as a distraction from acute pain to the extent that it can even be used in surgery in lieu of drugs and stuff. And I guess I was wondering, in the context of people with chronic pain, if you had noticed anything similar, or if you had, kind of asked people about their relationship to their pain in VR versus in person.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. And of course, as you mentioned, that is sort of the history. It has been used therapeutically. So when we talked with participants about it, it seemed like one participant in particular did use VR for escapism as a way to not think about pain. And there have actually been some studies in the virtual embodiment lab that have focused on distraction from pain in VR worlds. So it's definitely something that people mentioned, but other people didn't necessarily want to use it as a tool for escapism, right? So it's important to have both options. Yeah, thank you.
I really enjoyed the slide that explains some people wanting to express their current sense of identity or where they currently are versus this sense of moving forwards in time to where they might want to go or like a future self. Did you notice any insights about after they picked the avatar and the study concluded if that impacted their preferences for self-expression or the idea of where I am versus where I want to go, who I am versus who I want to be?
Yeah, thank you for the question. We didn't ask about that in particular because we didn't really follow up with them after the study session, but we did notice sort of throughout the session as people were exposed to different temporal options, as well as just the movement library and thinking more about representing their chronic pain. There were differences throughout. There were some people who started off saying, I can't even imagine how to represent this. I'm not super interested. And then by the end, they were like, no, I want to sink into nostalgia. I want to think about ways to represent my present self. It is important to me. So as people became more open to possibilities, I think that it expanded what they were willing to think about and engage with moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's get a hand for Ria and welcome our next panelists.
Is anything coming through? It is connected. Okay, hold on. 2 moments, sorry. No, but that's fine. Give me a second. That's yours. Is it coming through? Anything?
Do you want to do a maybe quick introduction while we're getting the tech set up?
Hi everyone, I'm Meg Fozzard. I'm a disabled freelance producer. I'm a white woman in my early 30s with short, dark, curly hair, and I'm sitting in a hot pink wheelchair with the pink and green spokes. I'm wearing a matching shirt and trousers with a grey, blue, and yellow pattern on them.
Hi, I'm Joel Leclerc. I'm Meg's access support. I'm wearing a black shirt with lace details. I have a pointy beard, long hair tied back, grey shorts, and unfortunately blue trainers because the rest of them didn't get packed. We also have Amy Crighton, who's part of the project. Amy's going to introduce herself later, fingers crossed, once this nice man has sorted my laptop. If not, I'll try it on the other one, but the videos don't work. Anything? Please, dear God. You know my other role is actually doing tech for shows. Hey! All right. Just, okay. So, here we have, make breaks. Here we have 2 women. We have an image of them from the back. They're facing forwards. One of them is in a wheelchair and the other one is not. And the text reads, Cripping up Meg Fozzard and Amy Crighton, how we're using VR to challenge ableism.
Next slide, please.
Yes, ma'am.
So, hi, I've already introduced myself. I'm Meg Fozzard, and here are some of the brilliant people I've worked with over the years. On this slide, there are logos for Unlimited, the National Theatre, the English Drawing Theatre, University College London, and Open City Documentary Festival. It's really great to have Sasha Wares here, who I worked with on the award-winning experience Museum of Austerity, and whose work really inspired this piece.
Have we got sound?
Dramaturg now working in XR. I am a very pale white British person, non-binary person with short brown bob, glasses, and a black t-shirt on.
So for those of you that couldn't hear, because that didn't go through the speakers, that's Amy's self-description. Amy is a pale white person with short hair wearing black. Just go on to the next slide.
We're going to play a video for you now.
All right, fingers crossed, guys.
Maggie, skating along Venice Beach. One thing she really wants to do on holiday.
Like Bambi on ice.
Well done, kiddo.
All right, so here we have a still from the video. Meg is wearing a black t-shirt. She has a short skirt and roller skates on.
So this video was taken just a couple of days before I became disabled. That Meg was never late. A bus journey didn't make her feel anxious. People didn't stare at her. Even her voice was different. Next slide, please.
And on this slide, we have a stylized illustration showing a group of people that are getting onto a double-decker bus stop. The scene's viewed from a lower perspective, which is suggesting that the viewer is seated in a wheelchair. In the foreground, a pair of legs in trousers are visible, with one hand resting on a purple wheelchair.
So, Cripping Up is an interactive VR experience where the audience member embodies me now as we go on what should be a simple journey, but for me feels like an odyssey. They will experience the ableist barriers that I face every day so they can begin to understand how I feel. I want people to understand how their small actions affect the way the world is and how that affects me too. And I feel like the only way I can make them understand is to make them feel it too. People may think they know what it's like to be a wheelchair user, but the reality is much deeper.
So how are we going to recreate Meg's experience in VR? The experience is a day in the life. Meg receives a phone call inviting her to an event. She must make a journey to get dressed, catch a bus, and navigate London. Along this journey, you're accompanied by a blurred figure who chats to you. This is Meg from before, the voice that still makes up Meg's inner monologue. She provides insight into Meg's story and how being a wheelchair user can be emotionally and physically exhausting. At key moments, the audience will be invited to interact with actions such as putting on your shoes, and we will be cripping the tech in these moments to more accurately represent Meg's experience. We'd like to utilise hand tracking technology to make this feel more accurate and immersive, and we'd like to pair this with a wheelchair that's rigged up as a controller, allowing participants to push themselves through the experience as Meg would. So this is a snapshot of the audience journey related to these interactive moments. The audience will enter with their own assumptions of disability, which will rapidly drop off as they reach the first obstacle. They'll gain mastery over this obstacle before encountering another, and so forth, until they reach a new perspective by the end of the experience. At this point, they'll have a chance to hear directly from Meg, allowing her to remind them that unlike her, they get to walk away. This first moment of mastery would come from us asking the audience to put on a pair of shoes. What they don't realise from the get-go is that we're cripping the tech to misalign the controllers, mimicking the jerking that Meg's limbs often do. They'll go to pick up the shoes and miss, begin to understand what the difference is, and adapt their own actions accordingly, allowing them to complete the puzzle, just like Meg has to adapt her environment to complete daily tasks. Would you be able to reach for my shoes, please?
So the video that was just shown was of two people, a man that was sat down who had strings attached to his wrists. Amy was holding on to those strings, and as she instructed the man to reach forward for the shoes, Amy would make the man's limbs jerk away in a similar way to Meg's limbs and how they work.
Next slide, please.
This is a very lo-fi analog version of the kind of effect we want to simulate. We plan to build the environments for the experience in a game engine and have been inspired by games such as Sable and Spiritfarer to take a simplistic colour block approach. We want to evoke the area of London that Meg now lives in with its concrete and its brutalism, and also provide a sense of isolation, even in a crowded city. We will use volumetric capture for Inner Meg. We want her to stand out from the rest of the experience and find that VolCap can really evoke a sense of memory and ephemeralness, which we want to imbue her with. This will also allow us to work closely with an actor to depict this role, which will be an anchor point for the participant during the experience.
So this slide is titled Audience with the subtitle Quiet Radical Action. There are 3 photos. The first is of a shopping cart blocking a sloped access point outside an entrance. The second is a screenshot of a WhatsApp message that says, also, I'd be grateful for your advice if there's anything else that would be worth checking ahead of the day so it goes smoothly. And then finally, on the right, we have a photo taken from the perspective of a wheelchair user, which shows a Lime bike blocking the pavement.
For non-disabled audiences, we hope they'll recognise some of their own ableist behaviours in this experience, and they'll come away feeling empowered to act on their newfound empathy, to take quiet radical action, such as moving a bike off of a pavement. For the disabled community, we want to provide authentic representation of the disabled experience and empower them to speak up.
So we want this project to be experienced by people who have an idea of what disability is, but may not have first-hand experience. I saw how all my friends changed their behavior when I became disabled, so I know it's possible. We want this experience to provide a transformation for people who aren't close to a disabled person in their life. And currently, making the VR experience is easier than cloning me and getting me to become friends with everyone. And we want to target audiences who are politically engaged and seeking to learn more about the world around them.
And so here we have a slide that's titled Impact, and then below that we have challenge perceptions of disability, increase awareness of accessibility issues, provide study guides on increasing accessibility, facilitate viewings of the experience with embedded workshops. And the ideal impact partners would be Unlimited, Transport for All, and Disability Rights UK, and their logos are below.
We'd also be keen to have this experience shown within corporate settings alongside diversity and inclusion training tools, and target those involved in city planning departments. We'd offer viewings of the experience with an embedded facilitator who'd follow it with a workshop on the social model of disability.
We want this experience to increase awareness of accessibility issues, but in particular, we want everyone who experiences it to wonder if every building they go into that day is wheelchair accessible, and if the language they use to talk about the disabled community is respectful. So we want to provide study guides alongside the experience that outline steps you can take to make your language more accessible, and further actions that could be done to make individual change. For example, I already have a language guide in my Access Rider, so people who work with me know how to talk about me. Oh, we're not trying to tell people off, we're trying to encourage them to do better.
So here we have limitations of empathy in VR. It shows a poster for Notes on Blindness into Darkness, a VR journey into the world beyond sight, which was a VR project about blindness with a night sky and a tree branches.
So I want to talk briefly on possibly the most famous VR experience on disability, which is Notes on Blindness. And from the description, that all sounds great, right? Next slide.
This slide is titled Limitations of Empathy in VR. It shows 3 5-star reviews for the VR experience. The first one says, amazing. This is amazing. I never knew what it would have been like being blind until I saw Notes on Blindness. And because of that, I learned that being blind is not that bad. Being blind means it increases your other senses, mostly hearing. I now sometimes walk around the house feeling how good it would be if I went blind one day. I would recommend it for all people of all ages. Have fun. Then we have amazing, brought tears to my eyes and makes you value things you take for granted. And finally, we have, wow, I have 20/20 vision, so to see what it's like to be blind is crazy. Simply closing your eyes or putting on a blindfold doesn't give you a true experience. Only seeing thing and people when they make sound makes me wonder, what would it be like if I was blind?
So before I started working on Cripping Up, I did some research and this is what I found. Is this empathy? Probably. But to me, these reviews have a level of ableism and misunderstanding that the experience is only a snapshot of that life.
And so here we have limitations of empathy, which is a stock image of a woman with a VR headset on holding a hand out in wonder.
So the idea for Cripping Up came from my desire to make other people understand how societal ableism impacts disabled people. You've heard in this presentation some of the ways we're going to try to do that. However, I also feel frustration around VR being touted as an empathy machine. Just because somebody puts on a headset for 20 minutes doesn't mean they understand what it's like to be me day in, day out. This is something we really want to challenge with the ending of Cripping Up, where we remind people that, unlike me, they can walk away from the experience. The term Cripping Up comes from the world of acting, where non-disabled actors play disabled characters, and often win a lot of awards doing so. And I want to point out the similarities between that and trying out this VR experience.
And finally, we have a photocard of Med on her not dead day, wearing a pink tulle dress with a turquoise bra, having cut a cake with her face on it, and looking very pleased with herself. There's also the contact details for Meg and Amy on the screen.
Thank you for your time today. We'd love to take your questions now.
Hi, yeah, first of all, thank you so much for your presentation. It was just great hearing about your efforts to increase awareness, very, very important here. You had this fantastic graph showing that people enter the experience on a very high level and then, you know, they experience it over the time and then they have like a different level on the outcome. I was wondering, what about their emotions? Did you have any reactions that kind of changed and where you felt that after the experience, they understood you really way better on an emotional level as well?
Yeah, so currently this experience is at really early stages. So this is all we've got so far. So we haven't managed to test it out with people to see what the emotional response is yet, but that's something we'll definitely be looking at in the future.
Yeah, that would be very interesting. Thanks.
For sure.
I really appreciate this and look forward to working with you. I'm part of the mental health civil rights movement. And I wanted to ask, because politicians seem to be special people, how are you going to get them in the VR headsets? How are you going to do that and get that going? And what do you hope for in England to change?
That's a really good question. I would love to storm into Downing Street and force this on the Prime Minister right now, but I don't think I'm legally allowed to do that. So we're going to go much more low level than that and do stuff like town planning. That's a really good area that we think this could be really influential. We're also thinking of having it as a DEI training tool. As an artist, that's a bit, but I think it would do really well as that as well as being an artistic piece. No.
I don't know whether you know, but currently in the UK, our benefit system and our support system for disabled people is being absolutely abolished. The personal independence payment, which is a payment that is designed to allow people who have extra costs for being disabled, that's being scrapped or made harder to get into. And they're currently reducing access to work, which is a system that provides things like access support for people who are disabled and working. So currently, disabled people are under attack in the UK, and a lot of disabled people feel that there is a bit of a genocide happening because of the way that they are doing this and then bringing in the right to die. So it is a needed thing to try and give some empathy to a group of people that clearly have none. And I feel that potentially the people in this room might also understand that feeling. Anyone else?
We could have Justin come in and set up as well. Thank you. Time for one or two more questions.
Otherwise, I'm just going to rant on the UK system.
I think we have a microphone heading your way here.
Let me roll over, literally.
Is what you've told me, did that, I'm assuming, help spurn part of like what you're doing, like to move it faster? In a sense, not like rushing it with cutting corners, but there's a need because people are going to suffer because, like you said, it is a genocide. I hope that's not too personal to ask.
I'm sorry, what was the question there? I was not paying full
Oh,
attention.
it's okay. Is what you said, is what was said about the benefits and the right to die.
Yeah.
Has that quickened the pace of everything that you've been working on?
For sure. So I had this idea back in 2023. I didn't do a whole lot about it. It was just an idea. Then last year we started bringing people onto the team and we made a prototype of it as a 360 video, realized that was not good. And so now with everything that's happening in the world, there's definitely more of an urgency to get started and get this thing made for sure.
Thank you. I really appreciate this presentation and for answering my question.
All right, I think we have to move on, but a huge hand for Meg.
Hi, everyone. Let me see, if I can get my slides up. I'm also trying to see if okay, this works. That's cool. Yeah. I apologize for the technical moment. Yeah, so the work that I'm going to be presenting is called Lemmings, and I'll just get started. The first slides are mostly text. There we go. I'll start by saying my name is Justin Berry. I'm an average height white male with a kind of a beard and probably a little bit less athletic in appearance than I would prefer, wearing all black. Yeah, so Lemmings is a project that I've been working on for some time, and it's the goal of it is to reimagine the way that we have and use gestures in virtual reality. Hold on, let me see, is this, oh, that would make sense. No, I'll just use the button. Technology. Oh God. Hold on, here we go. Okay, there we go. So I just wanted to start off, this is a sort of a series of quotes on the left from an article that was on ablegamers.org by AJ Ryan. And I included it because I thought that in this one sort of single account, they did a really good job of breaking down so many of the sort of challenges or barriers to XR. And the big quote that I pulled out is just, it says, to be completely honest, I don't believe virtual reality is an accessible platform as it currently exists today. And I was sort of thinking, what makes it that way, right? One is that the solutions need to be hardware agnostic, right? One of the big problems with, or I don't know if it's a problem, but there's a lot of different headsets that come out, right? You have a piece of technology, it works well, maybe it works for you or maybe it doesn't, but it's gonna keep changing. And so if you have a software solution or you've built something that's gonna address an issue, that solution might not be viable in 6 months. And the other idea is just the one that I think everybody here is pretty familiar with, is that the solutions need to be embedded in the workflow. The full quote from them is, because accessibility wasn't thought of or considered in pre-production, no one on the team considers the thought until after the product is shipped, right? And so part of what I wanted to do is sort of look at the challenges on a really fundamental level, not how can I adapt what exists, but how would I reimagine it for a better use case. And a big part of it comes down to remapping. I think that it's well understood that the ability to remap or change controls is a major necessity for creating accessibility. Even in the 2 talks ago, as mentioned, right? Like, I don't want it to jump when I press the A button. It's like little things like that can actually be really powerful. And gestures in VR, as they're designed today, are actually very, very difficult to remap. Also, when emotion is inaccessible, it's completely inaccessible, right? It's like if you need to make a particular gesture with your left hand and you don't have a left hand, there's really no solution to that with the current software. So trying to create, what would something look like if it was hardware agnostic, embedding it in the workflow from the ground up, and trying to be as fully remappable as possible. So, oh, sorry. So that's what led to Lemmings. I thought there was an image there, but that's okay. So Lemmings is a Unity development toolkit for trying to create more accessible, flexible, and expressive gesture design. The idea of Lemmings is that, and on the screen, you'll see that on the right-hand side, there's some sort of images from the Unity interface, and then some text that is on the left. The idea of it is essentially to tag different objects in the scene as lemmings, and then follow where they move in space and to create spatial relationships between them. So rather than relying on fixed configurations of the hand, looking at the spatial relationships between different tracked features, right? Instead of thinking of, say, a thumbs up gesture as the full configuration of all 5 fingers in a particular shape or in a particular way, isolating a few of the physical features and using them to establish that gesture, the value of that is that you can then change which features are being tracked as part of that gesture and the thresholds for which they exist. So basically, the relationships here, there's 4 main types that Lemmings uses. One is just a single object, which is good for tracking collisions and position and rotation. But then when you look at a lemming couple, on the right side here is just a little diagram of some of the different things that you can calculate or look at in a gesture, right? If you have 2 objects, you can be controlling the way that they're facing, the gaze of those objects. You can control the twist of them in space. You can control the distance between them, right? And you can think of the most classic kind of couple gesture, right, is the pinch, right? There are a lot of different interfaces that rely on making that pinch gesture. But one of the problems is that gesture itself isn't remappable, and on a really fundamental level, if someone has hand pain or if they have other challenges, what does it mean to just be able to change the threshold so that this could be your pinch? Or if you don't have that mobility in your fingers, if you just want it to be a raising of your hand a certain distance from the floor, or even a twist of your wrist, right? If someone has a palsy or a tremor, it can be very difficult sometimes to get that exactly. And so having the ability to choose parts of your body that you can rely on and map gestures to them is really important, really powerful. And so that's what Lemmings is sort of setting out to do. Again, I'm going to kind of move through these quick because they're just different pictures of the types of relationships that you can build. There's another diagram on the right looking at how 3 different objects can relate, looking at the angles between things, the direction they're facing, the relative distances. And again, this is just a picture from the Unity interface of sort of what some of those options look like from within the inspector when you're setting it up. And finally, the last type is just a group looking at a large number of objects. If you want to see if someone's standing up or moving or the whole body is spinning or things like that, you can do this really granularly and loosely. You don't have to make it a tight, highly specific gesture. And this is something that you can add a large number of objects to, anything being tracked. A big part of it too with traditional approaches to gesture design is that they require really high fidelity, right? If you're going to make a hand gesture, it has to be tracking every single joint in your hand well enough to know that all of those joints are aligning into the condition. And when you meet that condition, it's on or it's off, right? And so one of the approaches that I tried to take was to incorporate low fidelity. not relying on all of the different joints. And that's the point of this sort of smaller groups like couples and thruples, just relying on a few points that could be intelligently and thoughtfully remapped, not necessarily by the designer that knows best, but by the user who knows their own body and their own limitations best. And so what you can see here is on the right side, there's another picture of the screen. I'm going to talk about that for in a second. That's a picture of the Unity interface. But basically, you know, the other big problem with these sort of machine learning based gestures is that they're not remappable in part because of their complexity, right? Machine learning does a really good job of saying, I'm looking at this hand and I can analyze all of these different things and know if it has met some criteria, right, within a window. But that criteria that it's using to decide if the gesture was made or not is pretty opaque. I mean, you can't really know how it's arriving at that decision. And so to remap it is not very intuitive. At best, you can kind of make some other gesture and say, I want this to be the one. But again, how it decides that or how it shifts it or how the thresholds work is something that you can't really know. One of the things that Lemmings strives to do, and Lemmings, by the way, I should say, is now it's open source, and if I seem a little out of it, it's because I submitted it at 1:30 in the morning last night to GitHub, so that everybody from today would be able to access it if they wanted. So, you know, bear with me if I kind of gaze off into the distance. But there are a couple features that aren't fully implemented yet, but they've been sort of architected in so that they can be. And one of them is if you look up at the green dots that are on the left of the example Lemmings, the goal of that is that when when you're setting up your gesture, you can track how well the tracking works for that individual tracked joint. And this can be really useful if you're different parts of your body may be tracked better than others. It might be more reliable for gestures. And that might be due to just the camera and the technology. It might also be due to your own body and the differences in how it's shaped. And so rather than sort of relying on a best guess, the idea was to try and configure in a way to click a button and get feedback on how well each of the different body parts are being tracked, so that you could choose ones that felt comfortable to you, but also that were reliable in terms of how they would create the gestures. So again, you know, using existing, oh, this is something I didn't mention because I'm, Lemmings uses existing systems. The idea of it is not to be a robust and complex machine learning you know, engine that sits atop and determines where everything is and is doing the camera calculations to figure out where your body is in space, but rather it's designed towards that goal of being hardware agnostic. It can use any motion tracking system that you want. What you do is when you put it in as a developer on the Unity end, you just select any feature tracked by any system and it becomes a lemming. And the idea of lemmings, where the name comes from, because people ask and I take it for granted, but if people are familiar with the sort of mythology of the lemmings, which are these little rodents, is that they'll so blindly follow the herd that they will just completely fall off a cliff, you know, regardless of instinct. And so the idea was you're turning these different objects into lemmings that are blindly going wherever the tracked object is and sort of looking at them in these sort of family groupings or herds. But again, here you can kind of see in the image that you're taking the gesture tracking system, and a simple couple gesture can go from being a finger pinch to an extension of the hand just by changing the locations that are being tracked and the thresholds that are being used to determine whether the gesture's met. And a big part of that is when we think about that idea of thresholds, right? This is sort of like a technical term, but if you really think about it, what it comes down to is how far out do I need to extend my hand to have achieved this thing? And just having a number that you can change is much more intuitive than, like trying to rebuild or retrain a system. So the simplicity goes a long way. Oh, geez. But having this simple thing also makes having it be so simple is part of what makes the remapping possible. This is just sort of like a big scene from the user-facing interface, but you'll notice there's 2 buttons on the right side that say set from scene. That's for the minimum and the maximum values of the threshold. So that would be, for instance, if you were trying to say, if this would be the minimum of a pinch, when you go down to that, that's you've made it, you've pinched. The idea is that you could click a button and just wherever it's comfortable for you, that becomes the new minimum and maximum, right? So people can set it intuitively on their own without necessarily having to be an expert in programming or coding. Yeah, so, what have I learned trying to do this? The first thing is that Lemmings came about because we were working with a screen-free immersive headset, and we were trying to think about how people would interact with it. And I really saw that as an opportunity to reimagine the entire premise of how we interact gesturally with XR and immersive interfaces, how gestures are imagined. Because a big part of how gestures are designed and developed is actually around the ability to see what's going on, right? If you've used a lot of gestures in VR and you're sighted, you'll be really familiar with this gesture. This isn't a gesture that does anything in the game or the experience. This is when you're shaking your hand in front of you to make sure that the virtual hand is matched up well enough so that you can now try and make another gesture. But what does it look like when you don't have those affordances, when you don't know that? You're not getting that feedback. And this more streamlined and simple gestures make it easier to get feedback on whether something's working or not. You know what part of your hand or your body is involved. You're not trying to guess at which parts matter and which don't. What you'll see here on the right side, this is just sort of like a screenshot of the user-facing interface. So the way that Lemmings was designed is that whenever you build a gesture or you create a relationship, you add a description and an ID as you go. And all of that information automatically populates to a user-facing interface. So that's where you could give a user information and say, this is a gesture that's going to work with, 2 tracked objects. You can choose what those objects are. These are things that you might be concerned about. This is a suggestion for what might work well. And you can have a limited selection of which tracked features you can apply to the gesture. And you can also get that confidence reading right there. I'm sorry that the names are so lame. It just says like example lemming 1, example lemming 2. Yeah, it's embarrassing. But it's like I'm like up here looking at it going, oh God. But yeah, so some of the things that we were looking at, it's worth mentioning as well that, one of the goals with this was not to try and come up with like the solution that works for a community, because there's not a solution, right? There's not a community that needs the most support. It was to try and create a sort of baseline from which many people could try different things. And the communities that we were sort of talking to or consulting with the most were mostly actually doctors. I'm at the Yale Center for Immersive Technologies in Pediatrics, in a lab within that as well called XR Access. No, I'm sorry, Jesus, that's here. XR Peds. I'm not part of XR. I'm just here today. I'm not, no. XR Pediatrics. And so, but so a lot of what we were doing is we were looking at different populations that people wanted to work with people using virtual reality for treatment or care, but those populations struggle to actually use gestures effectively, right? One is small kids, and small kids, their bodies are just smaller. They're just, the systems are not designed to track them. If anybody wants to talk about spatial audio and HRTFs and child head shapes, find me afterwards. I won't, it's a problem, okay? But so part of that is we were looking at full body experiences that kids could do using these kind of gross body motor gesture systems, because that's what the clinicians were saying they needed the most support with. So using Lemmings to do that. And then the other one was people in occupational therapy that were struggling with adjusting rates of mobility. And so what we did was we created a musical instrument. And the idea was that as you're playing the instrument, you can change those thresholds, right? So maybe making a note starts by doing this, but as your flexibility increases, you can move that threshold further and further back. And so you can kind of work with the patient as it's expanding. This is all stuff that that we've been consulting with and looking at. We haven't run studies in that, but these are the kinds of things that we design. What we did do for the musical instrument, we built the Scott, and you know, one of the things about it too was that, you know, musicians that struggle, that have had injuries and stuff and may not have the dexterity to play the instrument they're familiar with, part of it was thinking about trying to have an instrument that was remappable so that they could kind of, you know, meet those needs. In the Scott, we did build. It's pretty cool. This is my colleague, Michael. There's two people in the image. The one on the left is holding a guitar, and the one on the right is wearing a blue shirt and wearing a strange headset that was donated to us by Reality Labs Research as part of exploring this work. And what they're actually doing is playing an instrument with their hands. If you're awake at like, okay, so sorry, I'm gonna rush to questions. I'm almost at the end. But if you're around at like 3 or 4 in the morning, there's going to be a performance as part of the new instruments for musical expression that's going to be the world premiere of a composition with Scott. Again, this is just sort of looking at Scott. This is sort of the default mapping to play the instrument. And this is just giving a sense of a totally different kind of mapping that you could do to get a totally different, same instrument, but just interacting with it in a very different way. These are just some screenshots of how the different gestures are visualized. This also shows that it can connect directly with Unity's input system, so you can incorporate other multiple mappings for different devices. And then finally, at the end, I'm doing it. What do we want to do with Lemmings? The real question is, what do you want to do with Lemmings? That's why I was so eager to get it up on GitHub. You know, there's a limit to what I can do by myself. I'm not a community, I'm an individual. And I'm also limited in my focus in terms of how this could be applied. And so I am desperate and excited for anybody that wants to try and explore this. I'm going to be having a little demo of it, not with mocap, but just with like showing the system as part of the demo today. And with that, you can find me. And I think, is there any time left for questions?
We can get 1 or 2 questions while we have the next presenters come set up.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Actually, it's really an important topic you are addressing. So my question is that have you done any researches about integrating your research with the brain-computer interface? Because as you know, it's nowadays it is going forward, and a lot of researchers are done in it. Thank you.
Yeah, so one of the projects at the lab, we're doing a lot of different work with biometrics. We're interested in using them for control. We're also using them for feedback and evaluation. One of the things that's tricky about like biometric or brainwave reading interfaces is similar to the problem I was mentioning with remapability, right? It's like you can get it to work, but it's very difficult to control or know how or when it works, if that makes any sense. And so I think that it's definitely something that we've looked at. I think that for Lemmings, I think the thing I really wanted to do was try and make it as obvious what was going on as possible. Um, because I was, and again, this is a little bit of a bias, but because there's so many communities, I can imagine it being helpful to, and I don't know all of their needs, you know? So it was sort of trying to make something that was as transparent as possible so that ideally the users themselves could kind of figure out how best to employ it.
Hello. I'm
Yep.
a little close to the mic, my bad. My name is Zuri Chavers. Nice to meet you. Doing research on Alzheimer's patients and trying to make their accessibility a lot more easy and also track their transition, specifically early stage Alzheimer's patients. My question for you has more to do with integrating the machine learning. I think you touched based on it in your speech, but I just wanted to know how readily accessible it is to kind of train on typical movements of the person and then make adjustments iteratively.
That's the whole thing. So with that idea of setting from the like resetting the thresholds from the scene basically means like if you're trying to do a gesture and you get tired, you can hit a button, change it to be different. So you can do a lot of the remapping like almost instantly. And a big part of it too, you know, we think about accessibility, it's like, it's not always I can't make that movement or I can't make that gesture. Sometimes I can't make it for long. And so being able to adjust those thresholds in real time from day to day or even, you know, within a given session of doing something is important and something that we wanted to accommodate.
Awesome. So you can monitor how long someone does
Yeah, like if someone, for instance, if someone was trying to do a gesture and it wasn't working the way they expected, you could just tweak it to make it work the way that they expected. So for instance, if they're trying to, you know, make a gesture and it's not working, you could be like, here, put your hand out. Okay, I'm going to click the button, bring it back in, click it again, and now that's your range.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, I think that's all the time we have for questions for Justin, but thanks so much. Definitely would encourage you to post the GitHub link to the Slack. And in fact, I would really encourage all of our speakers to join Slack and for folks to ask them questions there, because our Slack is not just for the symposium. It's really intended to be a community where people can talk about this kind of stuff. Probably the research network is going to be great for a lot of the ongoing conversation that come out of this. With that said, we have our last presenters here before lunch. I am going to ask our breakout discussion leaders, whoever's going to be talking about those, to be ready to come up immediately after. But for now, let's hear from Anis and MD Mamunur.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. It's our pleasure to be speaking to you today about some of the work we've been doing on developing an AR navigation system for wheelchair users and users with decreased mobility. We'd like to start by introducing our team a little bit and introducing our background. So my name is Anis Idrizovic, and I'm currently a PhD student in optics at the Institute of Optics in the University of Rochester.
And my name is MD Mamunur Rashid. I am a PhD student at Warner School of Education, University of Rochester. And we have another colleague. She's not with us in person today. Her name is Huiran. She is also a PhD student in electrical and computer engineering in the University of Rochester. So since she's not here, she recorded herself in the slides that we have. We hope the audio will work. And also we collaborated with LBS Tech for our presentation. It's a Korean company. And we are part of a PhD training program in University of Rochester, PhD training program in AR and VR. So part of the program, we took training, attended courses, classes. So in our last course, which was a practicum course, we developed a project. Everyone loved it. We thought we should let the world know what we did. So that's why we are here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so for all of you that don't know where Rochester is, so we're located in Western New York, up in Lake Ontario, and we're located in the city of Rochester, with a very beautiful campus. If you look at campus at first, you can see it's a very nice campus, and officially UR is a fully accessible campus. However, if you look a bit more closely, what you're going to really soon find is that there's a lot of staircases and there's actually a lot of accessibility challenges for moving people in wheelchairs or even people with injuries or kind of like reduced mobility. Although the UR claims they're a fully accessible campus, it's very difficult to get around, and the accessible routes are usually very not obvious. And I think for us, kind of like doing this project and going around, it was a surprise to see how difficult it was to get around if you're in a wheelchair or if you have decreased mobility. So really, the problem is that our campus really is difficult to navigate, and this is not only a problem with the U of R campus, but with a lot of college campuses all across the United States, especially the ones that are in the Northeast that are a bit older. So kind of motivated with that, I called Google Maps to the rescue. So what I did is a little exercise here, and you can see that I was in front of one of the holes on the main University of Rochester quad, and I asked Google Maps to navigate me to the main bus station on campus. What I did is here, and you can see it circled in red, I selected the wheelchair accessible navigation route, and I had the Google Maps take me to what it thought was the most accessible navigation route. It's a very short distance, so it should have been pretty easy. But then what I soon realized is that Google Maps tried to take me right down a set of stairs and completely ignored all the accessible ramps that are on campus. And we tried a few packages, and we also collaborated with the university, and there really are no software, commercial or even university tools that would help somebody who's in a wheelchair or somebody with decreased mobility move around campus or really get around in any meaningful way.
So as Anis has mentioned, I mean, it was very surprising that even Google Maps does not work for wheelchair users. So there's definitely a need. So we have to start from somewhere, and it was like one class project. So we started in our campus. And if you come to our campus, it's a beautiful campus. We'd love to give you a tour. It's in upstate New York. So these are the places we tried to cover for accessibility routes. So this is one of the common places in our campus. So these are the accessibility features that we want to cover in our app: accessible doors, stairs, elevator, toilet, and these are the buildings that are in that area. So these are the places these are the buildings and accessibility features we tried to cover in the app that we created. So let us show you like how we collected our data. As we mentioned before, we collaborated with LBS Tech, which is a Korean company. So they provided us an app to collect the data. So just to clarify, there are actually two apps that we worked with. One was provided by LBS Tech, and the other one that we built, which we will also show later. So to collect the data, if you open the app, it will show you the map where you can navigate. So it's in Rochester. So if you go to the campus in the Eastman Quad, if Anis and we went to all of these buildings, we selected a building, and we collected photos of these accessibility features, like the stairs, elevator, how the doors are, what types of door they are. All right. So this is how, so we took the photo, we uploaded them in the app, and later our another colleague, Huiran, who mostly worked on the development of the app that we built. So in the next slide, Huiran will speak how she developed the app. All right, so let's go to the next slide.
Now let's talk about the development of this navigation app. We used Unity as the platform, and there are two packages that contribute most to our app. The first one is AR plus GPS, which helps to render AR objects in real world given GPS location. The second one is Mapbox, which allows us to draw the reference 2D map during navigation. The LBS Tech provides us two APIs to get access to our previously collected data. The first one returns the location and information of each building and entrance for the user to select their destination. The second API returns the wheelchair-friendly navigation route to bring people to their target. Here's the overall processing flowchart of our app. The orange blocks represent the user, the green blocks represent the app on the phone, and the blue blocks represent the LBS Tech API service. As we initialize the app, it will talk to the point of interest API to get all the available buildings and entrances, and the app will demonstrate them on the user interface. The user will select the building and entrance. Then the app will talk to the routing API to get the wheelchair-friendly navigation route. Finally, the app will render the route and instructions in the AR space and on the 2D map to guide the user to the destination. We implemented the app with the reference to this GitHub repo.
And as you mentioned before, I'm in a PhD student in education. Anis is in optics, and Huiran is in computer science. So we needed feedback and expertise of accessibility. So we collaborated with one faculty member who is an accessibility expert, Christian Love, and we also we had Jerry Flores with us. She's an accessibility expert and an accessibility rights advocate. So her feedback was a game changer for what we did. So some of the features that we add based on her feedback was like add voice feedback, time to destination estimate, information, the types of information that she thinks that could benefit the wheelchair users, the types of information when they reach the location. All right, so
Yeah, so after kind of like going through the first two steps, which was like collecting the accessibility data, doing the app development kind of like together with a wheelchair user, and this is actually what we came up with. So we're kind of excited to show the app interface. So right now the scope is limited to the Eastman Quad, so there is a limited number of locations you can navigate to on campus. But if you were to open the starting menu, this is what it would look like. So basically there would be a list of buildings you can navigate to that I've shown in red, and then on the bottom in green we have a real-time map and location so the user can globally position themselves and see where they're at all times. Once a building is selected, what actually pops up is the different entrances to the building, so the user can visualize them, and that's something that we got as feedback from JD. So then they can see what is the width of the doors, is it an accessible door, and then they can accordingly pick which entrance they want to navigate to. And as you can see, the map, the real-time map is there the whole time. And then as you actually start navigating, right now it's implemented on a cell phone. So the idea is that a user could lift up the cell phone or mount it. It would read the camera info real time and orally the path on top of it. So then it will show these big banners to show when, where the direction needs to be taken. There's a path that you're supposed to follow, and then there's these big arrows that kind of signal, okay, it's time to make a turn. We also have time and distance estimates, we first only had distance estimates, but JD mentioned that that's not as useful because you don't know what the terrain is. So we've worked with LBS Tech, and they developed kind of like an in-house algorithm that would predict how long it would take a wheelchair to take to a certain location given the geographical conditions, which was kind of quite exciting. And then I'll give it back to Huiran. We'll kind of walk through.
There are several outstanding features of our app that brings convenience to the wheelchair users. First, we provide true wheelchair accessible navigation service, avoiding the stairs or any other blockage for wheelchair movement. Second, we showcase wheelchair estimated time to the destination, providing a reasonable expectation to the users. Third, we render the routes and instructions in the AR environment, creating an immersive experience and straightforward guidance. We also provide voice feedback for people with visual impairment. Finally, we made a specific visualization for the building entrance, making it easier for people to find their final destination.
So as you mentioned before, I mean, this is just like we did it in the scope of one semester. It was last semester actually, so very fresh. So we want to work more on this project. So based on the feedback that we have received, we want to extend the scope beyond just our campus, maybe in USA entirely. We don't know. We want to add voice prompting, tactile feedback, weather and surface tracking. We want to do more user testing with diverse representation. And wheelchair, they already have some sort of technology. So how we can integrate our app in the technologies that they have, and some additional facility features as well. We also want to include spaces like emergency safe spaces, accessibility parking and bus stops. Tunnels in University of Rochester, we have tunnels because it gets very cold during winter. So we have tunnels to go from one building to another. So tunnels maybe, accessibility, general neutral bathrooms, because the feedback that we have received that wheelchair users prefer general neutral bathrooms because those have more spaces. And we are also in discussion, today in the morning, we had some email exchanges. Maybe we want to try with some AR glasses. So we are going to do some testing in the next few months, like how this technology could be applied in AR glasses. That could be fascinating, we believe.
And we're probably going to have LBS Tech come to Rochester, and we're planning to do some more user testing with the AR glasses. So if you guys are interested, come talk to us later, and we can connect. And then for the end, we just like to acknowledge our collaborators, Dr. Daniel Nikolov, who connected us with LBS Tech and was our advisor on the project, LBS Tech and their whole team for being very supportive in the process, our accessibility experts that were really the key to this whole process, JD Florence and Dr. Kristen Love, and the AR/VR program coordinators that kind of got us together on this interdisciplinary project and allowed for us to kind of like present this and get this going.
And our project is also funded by NSF grant, the AR/VR program that we mentioned. And also we want to thank XR Access as well for providing us scholarships and thank you so much. So if you have any questions, thank you. So while we take questions, this is how the app looks like. We cannot actually show it in our phone right now because it works in our campus, but you can see it in the video. Thank you.
Hi, well, thank you so much for this amazing presentation. My name is Sarah, and I'm actually a student at Cornell University in Ithaca, and I struggle to see in low contrast settings. And I think I would find this product really useful. I was just wondering, are there considerations for mapping in areas, I guess considering if someone were to navigate at nighttime, are there considerations for going in lighted areas as opposed to a direction that would take you to maybe a low lit setting?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Actually, that's something we got out of our user testing, like something really. So we don't have that right now, but I think we are looking into expanding that in that direction. One piece of feedback we got is also in different weather conditions, it may be better to take different routes, especially if we get a lot of snow. But that could be something very useful to add. So we'll definitely keep that in mind.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for your work. I was wondering about how to expand this to other areas than your campus. You were saying in your future work, it would be great to expand the scope, right? How much work was it actually to take all the pictures of all the bathrooms and accessibility and entrance and to actually integrate into that? So how much work would we need to do to extend the scope of this app?
First of all, we need money. All right. We need money and we need a team. So we have in our University of Rochester, we have actually for AR/VR, we have excellent facilities. Dr. Shiri actually gave a talk to our campus several times. So we have, and also we have the AR/VR program. So we have people who would like to volunteer as not just volunteer. Maybe stipend and financial assistance will be available. We believe if we can make it happen.
Yeah. But then to kind of answer your question a bit more closely, I think for us, it didn't take too long. And the idea is the app for data collection is already available on App Store. So I think the idea that LBS Tech has is that you could have this downloaded on any phone and any user could just kind of take photos. So I think we have a grassroots effort. It would be feasible, but if it's only a few people, I think it took us maybe an hour or two to collect data on campus between the two of us. But if there's a grassroots kind of movement, I think it could really have a lot of potential.
Kind of like a community sharing project across the world, kind of. That would be cool.
Yeah, and I mean, funnily, somebody had downloaded the app on campus and added some data to one of the buildings. And to this day, we didn't know who it was. But it seems to somehow have gotten out there a little bit.
Interesting.
Oh, I have an idea how to get money. I think you should go to Google because I get lost in New York City all the time. This is fantastic. And really the insights you have are really, really good. I'm trying to see from the video, I was curious if you took it from the eye level of someone walking tall, or did you take it from an eye level of someone in a wheelchair?
So I did it. So it was from my eye level.
Thinking about accessibility, wheelchair level might be another feature that you could choose, thinking about that.
Yeah. That's the type of feedback we're looking for. Thank you so much.
And then we have just one question from Zoom before we get start the process of getting towards lunch. Saying, it's great work. Is it possible to use this app for blind and visually impaired folks? And is it freely available on Android and iPhone?
So it's not available on Android or on an iPhone at this point, and we have not done any work on adapting it to blind and low vision users, but I think that is in the future works.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. Round of applause. Yeah, let's bring up our breakout speakers and have them just give a sentence or two about what each of these are going to be about. Let's see. Yeah, why don't you have you all come over to this side?
Numerical order.
Sure. I think first come, first serve, by the way. Starts off.
You want me to solve, please?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Nigel Newbutt. I'm going to be running B2, the neurodiversity and extended reality, and the couple of sentence pitch is that we're looking to explore the often overlooked intersection of neurodiversity and extended reality, inviting some dialogue and questions on the emerging opportunities, challenges, and ethical imperatives for creating immersive technologies that are genuinely inclusive of neurodiverse populations. And I'll be running that with my colleague, Logan.
Hi, I'm Larry Goldberg. I am leading a session B3 with Michael Burvell from CEO of Test Party and Pierce Clark from the XR Association. Is Pierce here? Hey, Pierce. So the pitch is, with consensus forming around XR and AI best practices, avoidable harms, and incentives for beneficial development, we need to take the next step in codifying, distributing, and enacting mandates to assure people with disabilities are well served by these emerging technologies. In other words, take action now.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen McCoy. I'm from North New Jersey, and I am a deafblind journalist. I actually made history as the world's first Black deafblind journalist. I write for Able newspaper, and I have a nonprofit called Spoken Heroes. And my breakout session is going to be about digital disability and content creation. And our pitch is it's many different things that comes into that. Just being able to elevate when speaking about networking, and also digital twin software, and bringing merging those worlds and bridging that gap between the virtual and physical experience. So I'm grateful for the organizers for allowing me to be part of this, and I'm glad to be working with all of you, and I look forward to meeting all of you as well. So thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Chelsea and I will be co-leading B5, Extended Reality in Healthcare, with Dr. Blanc, who is sitting over there. And for our one sentence pitch, in this session, we will be discussing strategies for ensuring equitable access to extended reality technologies in healthcare, with a focus on bridging the digital divide and promoting inclusivity across diverse demographic groups. Thank you.
And I'm Brian Smith. I'm leading B4 for people who want to geek out more on video games and meaningful accessibility and brainstorm together what's next. Where should the community focus its efforts? Thanks.
All right, everybody, if you could take your seats, I think we are just about ready to start on the breakout summaries. Take your seats, please. Okay. Why don't we have all the breakout leaders come up on the right-hand side as we're getting ready here. All right, Ria, take it away.
Hello? Okay, awesome. First of all, thank you to everyone for participating in the breakout sessions. It seems like everyone was having great dialogue, and especially thank you to all of the breakout leaders who took time out of their weeks leading up to the symposium to prepare the key questions, prepare the sessions, and then to speak with you today. So we're going to go ahead and have all of the breakout leaders present around a 1-minute summary of 2 to 3 key takeaways from their sessions. And we'll go ahead and go in the order that they are listed. So we'll start off with B1, and that is disability, content creation, and the arts. So if you would like to join me on the stage, that would be great. Would you
Thank you. To get us started, my name is Alice Shepherd. I'm a multiracial Black woman with dyed orange curly hair, wearing a black t-shirt, black trousers, and I'm seated in a manual wheelchair. I have a bright pink mask on. In disability content creation, we talked about what is disability when it shows up in content. Why does disability matter? What is a story? Is it a personal story, an individual story? Or are there other stories that can be connected to abstraction, concepts, political situations, something that is both personal but not necessarily the individual story of a person ourselves? And we talked about access as beginning at the beginning of the process. And we also talked about access being functional, but also connected to the expertise of the communities who use it. End thought.
Absolutely. And it was such a great discussion. This is Stephen McCoy, by the way. I am a Black male, 5'10". Sometimes I like to lie and say I'm 5'11". I have a bald head, wasn't born this way. I have a beard and brown skin, brown eyes. And it was such a great discussion. We spoke on authenticity, when it comes to representation and what is that in the world of media, and who are the ones to tell our stories and who are the experts, and the experts will be us. And the best thing is to ensure that from the very beginning, when we speak about content and inclusivity design, and making sure that the authenticity is there. Oftentimes, our stories are placed in the hands of those who not always. We always say that we make sure that everyone definitely has the best intention, but we should be there from the very beginning, from the moment that a producer or a writer picks up their pen. And we also, with the audience, they have such great insight in bringing their experiences. We spoke about assets for all, and we made a few examples of that, about the ramp. We have a ramp, and that can be for someone with a wheelchair, someone who's blind, and also the UPS guy. But it was such a great, tasty discussion, and I wish everyone was there. It was really great. And what else did we speak about? What else?
I'm Kira Benz, and I will add a few more thoughts. I am a white woman. I'm petite with long blonde hair, wearing black with black matching flats. One of our final thoughts was to discuss space and two-dimensional spaces and two-dimensional content creation versus 3D content creation and three-dimensional space, and how those spaces can be collaborative, and that's the best way. We also imagined, and we ended with a future exercise for what a future XR Access Symposium could look like in virtual reality 10 years from now. And that space had floating clouds, it had name tags that appear over people's heads that describe their disability and ways that they want to communicate. We imagined that this space could have ways to communicate that won't overwhelm anyone. We imagined teleportation in this space, and we imagined a disco party where everyone gets to feel the beat.
Absolutely. And then can I add the kiosk?
And the kiosk.
Yes. So I had this cool idea of us being in this space. Let's just say we're reimagining the kiosk, reimagining the space. So there'll be 5 kiosks here. You guys are the kiosk, and there's a light, almost like the airport, right? And you walk up to the kiosk, and there's a light that flickers for the viewers and attendees at home or wherever they are virtually. And that gives us the opportunity to be able to walk to the actual kiosk and network. I think it's so important because oftentimes people see people with disabilities and don't feel that people at home are professionals. Those individuals are absolutely worth networking with, and we want that to be such an inclusive space for everyone to be able to have that same opportunity. We even spoke about the digital twin as well, having that double replica and that identical replica, and the space being almost identical, where you can still walk in different rooms, and obviously the kiosk will give the opportunity for all of us to still be able to have that opportunity to network and build businesses. So yeah, we had a good time. Yeah. Yep. All right.
Breakout leaders, Stephen, Kira, and Alice. We are next going to bring to the stage our breakout leaders for neurodiversity and XR.
All right, I'm Logan. I'm a white male with long blonde hair tied back in a ponytail wearing a light blue shirt. For sake of brevity, our session covered inclusive design and accessibility barriers, especially for the neurodiverse population. We've talked about centering neurodivergent voices in research, as well as bridging that research with the industry that we're targeting. We also discussed community-driven awareness and action, as well as the ethics, exposure, and the real world adoption of these accessibility features. Finally, we talked about how the momentum could be building with these neurodiverse accessibility features.
Hey, thanks. So my name's Nigel Newbutt, white male. My driving license says I'm 5'11", so I'll take that. I'm wearing a dark pair of trousers and a blue t-shirt. So just to follow up with what Logan said there, some of the key takeaways. We talked about design for inclusion from the start. VR and extended reality must move towards born accessible, which was one of the terms that somebody mentioned. The idea of reducing technical barriers and other contexts within technologies like this. Involving neurodivergent individuals meaningfully, inclusion goes beyond consultation. We really need to see neurodivergent individuals as key collaborators and knowledge makers in this space. And finally, as you mentioned, also bridging the gap between innovation and implementation, between research and practice. We've sort of talked about there being quite a big gap in this particular space, which needs to be reduced significantly to really see this sort of technology scale and benefit this population. Thank you so much. That's all we got.
All right, thank you both. We'll go ahead and welcome our leaders for XR and AI policy and standards.
Thanks. Pierce is going to start. Michael was not able to join us, so that's the two of us.
Yes, Pierce Clark. I'm a tall, maybe very tall man with a green shirt and gray pants. We talked about XR and AI policy and standards. So we talked about standards development organizations and how some of the work that they're doing might translate into actual regulation at a federal or state level. We talked about the relationship between innovation and regulation. And a good quote that came out of our discussion was, I might get this, is good innovation prevents bad regulation. Good regulation prevents, yeah, flip it. And I thought that was just a really great quote. We also talked about content moderation. We talked about the liability for AI. So if AI generates a unsavory outcome, who should be liable for that? And I'm sure there's some other things we talked about too.
We also dug in on a very interesting proposed national regulation that said there shall be no state-driven regulation for 10 years. There's a 10-year moratorium that's been proposed. Yeah, it's real, and it's in the big, beautiful bill, but it might not be allowed to get through. So what the exceptions are and whether there are existing accessibility standards that would cover AI and XR as it exists today. Lots of questions around accessibility of the actual creation tools, as well as the output from AI and XR, and the liability issues, which are very interesting. Who's actually responsible for the harms? Is it the tool creator? Is it the language model creator? Or is it the individual and their parents? Because we've heard of some pretty dire stories lately with harms from AI. Interesting case recently about a chatbot promising a refund, and the company said, we didn't promise that, that's the chatbot. Well, who's really responsible for such a thing? And open source and open weight, what if it is in the public domain? Who's responsible there for any possible harms? Education is needed, obviously, particularly around parents and the users to make sure we can avoid the harms and promote the benefits. And all the notes are in the link, including the full transcript of the full hour, if you want to see, because it was captioned.
All right, thank you. And next up, we have Dr. Smith to speak about accessible game design.
Thank you. So I'll be brief here as well. We nerded out on video games, and we also talked about what does meaningful accessibility mean, what should it mean going forward, and what are some of the opportunities for games in the future to be made more accessible. Our conversation focused a lot on challenge and how challenge is relative depending on people's individual abilities. Something that could be challenging for one player might not be challenging at all for another, and it's really important that games understand that and that game designers understand that. That led to a big theme and takeaway of customization, that video games, we have to figure out how to make games and other assistive technologies, other systems, customizable without being overwhelming. And the fact that customization is such an important foundational problem in assistive technology, we always say that things should be customizable. And yet there's this fundamental tension between customization and curation from the designer. And so we're still not in a place where we just want to give people 10,000 knobs all the time. And so somehow we need a technological or a very creative way of overcoming that. And that's going to be important to games as well. And then I'll just make one other point, which was that our group had a lot of folks who also were not in games in the group. And I think that really helped our discussion. We got some really awesome ideas. One that I personally admired that I'll be thinking about a lot is the idea of creating tools that act as advocates for individual players, that almost shadow them and follow them around as they're playing games to try to understand what their experience is so that they can maybe turn the right knobs to actually help the player. Can we design player-focused AI that actually accompanies them on their journey? So I found that inspiring. Thanks.
All right, thank you. And now we have our final breakout, XR in healthcare.
Thank you. Okay, Judite Blanc. I am an Afro-Caribbean woman wearing a black and white dress, and I will be reporting about on our discussion on XR in healthcare. Okay, so during our discussion, we discussed the fact that over the past 25 years, XR have been booming in the healthcare, right? But there is an issue with clinical safety, with ethics, as well as accessibility. With regards to that, we discussed strategies to address interpersonal and systemic barriers to access in healthcare. A key concern is the gap in access and capability within certain communities, particularly those lacking infrastructure, confidence in digital literacy, or access to necessary technology. One unique point raised was the resistance some individuals exhibit toward digital literacy training. This reluctance may stem from feelings of shame or insecurity, which further complicate outreach efforts. Additionally, collaboration between academic institutions, and the healthcare industry present notable difficulty as these sectors often pursue divergent goals. For example, academics may be constrained by the imperative to publish or perish, whereas healthcare providers prioritize patient outcomes. Meanwhile, healthcare insurance leaders may focus primarily on profit, sometimes at the expense of those outcomes. So to improve collaboration among those diverse stakeholders, we discuss the fact that a community participatory approach is essential. Moreover, it is crucial to involve individuals who can effectively bridge the gap of communication between patient users, healthcare professionals, and developers, who often operate under different cultural norms and communication styles. Establishing advisory boards and conducting user testing are also critical components in fostering effective communication and ensuring inclusive and meaningful engagement. Thank you.
All right, so if we could just request one final round of applause for all of our breakout leaders. Great, thank you.
And thank you to Ria for organizing the breakouts, doing a great job as breakout chair. All right, so I think with that, we are ready for our last talk of the day from Dr. Nigel Newbutt. That's pronunciation. Perfect.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. And thanks for the wonderful day and the presentations. It's been really inspiring to see some of the work and hear about the research and the enthusiasm for continuing to pursue work in this space, which is really, really important. So I realize I've got the daunting task of being the last speaker and standing between you all and your happy hour cocktails. So I'm going to make sure I do keep on time as best I can. So my name's Nigel Newbutt. I look the same as I did a few minutes ago, except I've put a blue cardigan on, and I forgot to reveal I don't have much hair either. So I'm an assistant professor at the University of Florida in Gainesville, where I've been for the last 4 years. Before that, I was in Bristol at the University of the West of England in Bristol. And I've been researching with autistic populations and extended reality for the last sort of 10, 11 years already. And before then, working with virtual world technology, Second Life, with autistic populations. At the University of Florida, I run the Emerging Technologies Research Lab, under which we sort of co-design, co-create virtual reality and virtual environment technologies for autistic groups. And here's a couple of links to that work. They'll come up at the end also. But I want to talk a bit today about ethical processes and ethical practices within research domains for this population, because I think it's something that's been severely and completely overlooked. And I'm going to be delving a little bit into the details of ethics and IRB and how, again, we see the exclusion of this particular population in that space and how it could potentially influence and impact how virtual reality technologies are deployed with that population and could potentially have some harmful benefits. So like I said, I'm going to be looking into autistic specific concerns within this space. And why does this matter? What's at stake? Well, about 1 in 31 children are diagnosed autistic in the United States now. And within that, 1 in 4 people have some form of neurodivergence. So there's quite a lot at stake, and there's a lot of research with virtual reality technologies and autistic populations. And so I think there's something to be looked at here for sure. There's also a need to locate improved access to services, education, and employment for this population, which is where a lot of the research currently sits. And within that context, about 83% of autistic people are currently or underemployed, which is a statistic I'm afraid hasn't really improved over the last 10 or 12 years. There's just some recent data coming out which says that that hasn't really moved much. The needle hasn't moved in that area much. So extended reality within those spaces can potentially really improve and elevate those sort of outcomes. So we all know, we've heard here today, that extended reality is rapidly expanding across sectors: education, healthcare, entertainment, corporate training, and and many others, of course, we all know that. But despite this growth, ethical practices within research-based extended reality use, specifically with this population, is completely scant and very limited. Why does this matter again? What are the key concerns here? Because there's the potential for harm around sensory overload, sensory processing, emotional distress within these very hyper-realistic spaces now. A lack of autistic input risks a neurotypical gaze within these spaces, or these spaces being designed through a neurotypical lens. And there's this invisibility of ethical safeguards in current literature around the research that we engage. So I think there's quite a lot at stake and worth looking at. So these unique vulnerabilities and risks that may apply to this population include sensory overstimulation, emotional discomfort, and data exploitation within some of these environments and technologies. And the lack of ethical design can compromise autonomy, identity, and long-term well-being. So without inclusive design, XR risks in reinforcing stereotypes or potentially becoming inaccessible for some of these populations. But that's despite the promise and the potential of this technology for this population. VR holds real potential to support social skill opportunities, vocational training, personalized learning environments. And ethical and user-centered research can really help align these experiences with autistic preferences, protect against unintended harm, and promote neuro-inclusivity in tech design. And VR has quite a long kind of backdrop within autistic groups, first explored in 1995-96, looking at how VR could help autistic people cross roads safely, where they sometimes can't spot dangers and could run out in front of a car. So that was first explored almost 30 years ago. And then we started looking again at head-mounted display virtual reality technologies in 2015, 2016, when they became commercially available. So we were interested in kind of readdressing some of the usability, accessibility issues with, as it was then, Oculus SDK 1 and 2. The applications of this technology are quite wide and varied, from job skills, travel training, social skills, and daily living, museum and cultural access opportunities, and literacy and motor skills are all areas where VR has been deployed and used with this population. And XR is used increasingly due to its ability to offer these controlled, safe, repeatable environments for learning and exploration of these groups. So in other words, we sometimes see a bit of a natural fit between this population and these types of technologies. They offer a lot of advantages and affordances, designed well and applied well. So VR is customizable, predictable, and low risk for these populations. Speaking back to that idea of them being safe spaces for practicing real-world skills, they've been successfully used, things like interviews, and currently being used for driving as well, teaching autistic people how to drive in safe environments. And through which the supports include then social development, navigation, communication with real-time overlays in augmented reality, sensory regulation in some cases, and evidence also shows transfer of skills from these settings to the real world, which I think is kind of the ultimate goal for these technologies deployed and utilized with this population. And we had someone from Florio talking about that and the work they're doing. So I think there's a bit of a need, though, to circle back to this idea of sort of ethical dimensions within the research we undertake with this population and this technology. So autism diagnoses have tripled in 20 years, yet ethical guidance hasn't really kept pace with XR's growth or this rise in diagnoses. And despite nearly 30 years of extended reality research, only one paper in 2023 meaningfully addresses or recognizes ethical risks to this population. And as we've already sort of briefly mentioned, the idea of head-mounted display discomfort, sensory sensitivities, auditory experiences, feedback on XR design interface, and suitability for the context and the use are all kind of lacking. And as Jones says quite well in his study, we need to revise our collective understanding of the risks brought by XR technologies. So this technology is moving quite quick. I think we can all agree with that. And everything from eye gaze, everything from LLMs being built into these technologies now, there's they're moving very quickly. And as I said, I don't think ethical review processes are fit for purpose and moving quickly enough within that context. So these ethical gaps persist across research question design, evaluation of feedback processes, and inclusion of autistic user preferences. And there is no current guidance that I'm aware of, please share with me if there is, that exists for safe, ethical XR practices with autistic individuals within our research. And this means that ethical protocols are often underdeveloped or underreported, which means that when research talks about this technology with these populations and some of the benefits and the positive outcomes, they very rarely, if ever, talk to the ethical concerns, the ethical processes, how they got to that place in terms of ethical review processes, and even talk about anything that may have come up in that may have been negative. So this means that ethical blind spots risk harm, exclusion, and missed opportunities for meaningful impact. And I guess the goal of this sort of next few sections is a synthesis of some work we did to explore key ethical concerns within this space, with a view that we promote inclusive, informed, and user-centered practices more than they currently exist. So when we did, I'm not going to bore you with the details, but we conducted a systematic review of ethical review, papers reporting ethical review protocols, processes, and outcomes. There was only four that met inclusion, one of which was the Jones paper, which provided a much more of a critique of a need to revise and relook at this. So really only 4 papers in the last 20 years, 25 years doesn't represent to me the sort of diversity that you may expect to see. So we then go on to talk and present at least several areas that we think are really important moving forward to consider. And these are areas that should be built into ethical review processes, protocols, that universities should be looking at before they authorize research to be done in this space. And then I've put them into these sort of 3 buckets. We've got privacy, security, content regulation under a sort of safeguarding bracket. We've got design, consent, and co-production under accessibility. And we've got sensory overload, psychological safety, and realism under well-being. I'm just going to unpack those a little bit more before you can all get to your happy hour. Yeah, you keep nodding, you're waiting for that, aren't you? So under the safeguarding area, the challenges here sort of lean into the need for clearer consent processes. Consenting autistic people who may struggle with language, verbalizing, understanding certain aspects. And if any of you ever seen consent processes and how technical and jargon-led they are, it's quite worrying that we put those in front of people expecting them to understand what they're signing up to, frankly. Recognizing possible platform risks. I've just mentioned that all of these technologies are building in new ways of collecting our data, sharing our data. What are they doing with that? Are the users we're working with aware of those? And there's limited regulation of content tailored for autistic users as well. So this idea of overly stimulating, providing very realistic environments to people who may struggle under deciphering between real and not real environments is a challenge. The opportunities, however, there are to develop easy to understand, inclusive documentation, so accessible, inclusive materials that they can understand and know what they're signing up to, establish data management plans tailored to extended reality. For all of those who you work in universities will probably dread the idea of having to get risk assessment and data management plans in front of your IT department to get signed off. But it's really important that we understand what data is being collected from these apps and where they're going. Ensure researchers are trained in safeguarding, and that's just beyond the traditional safeguarding that we all have to do. This is about digging a bit deeper into safeguarding of people who are particularly vulnerable in particular ways. So we can involve autistic advisors in reviewing these materials, and we can also have autistic representation on ethical boards to help bolster this. Within accessibility and informed consent, there's this lack of inclusive design guidance for extended reality, as we've been talking about. We talked about a bit of that in our session. UX testing methods are still evolving, so some content isn't appropriate and well designed for this population, and consent is complex for vulnerable users. So the opportunities leading into that, or coming out of that, I guess, are the use of co-design with diverse autistic representations and populations. Again, it came up in our session today. We need to be really mindful of involving at all stages of our research, the populations we are researching with, because we are researching with them now, not on them. We used to do that many years ago, but we're much more inclusive in our research. Be explicit about design constraints and adaptations, and collaborate on consent and debriefing processes. Again, that's something that's not reported in the literature. How are researchers debriefing what happened during a session of research and data collection with this population? So that means we need to design all processes with autistic users in mind and build neurodiverse research teams. Do we have representation of this community in our research teams? Vitally important. And it can make the whole process of writing these ethical reviews and IRB applications much more inclusive and meaningful. The well-being sort of area, the challenges within there exist around the risk of sensory overload, distress, or disorientation. I'm sure we've all got stories of using VR with different people becoming disorientated and reporting issues and challenges. So this is susceptible, particularly for this population. And this idea of differentiating real from virtual can be a problem. Jeremy Baleson talks a lot about it and has done work with younger people where they struggle to understand, coming out of virtual reality, what is real, what is virtual. So that's another challenge, work with potentially younger groups. So the opportunities, though, are to use pre-study screening and post-study debriefing, pilot test for realism and impact, and engage broader stakeholders. So beyond just autistic participants, maybe the families, caregivers, educators, etc. So again, without sort of drilling this point, inclusion of autistic researchers in our analyses and experience design is absolutely vital, as well as continuous feedback loops during study phases. So making sure we're testing this stuff, previewing this stuff, and we have people who are willing to experience this stuff before we go into these study situations where we could potentially be doing harm. So this is my last slide. So I hope I've stressed where some of the tensions might be with this population, with these technologies, but there is a way of, I guess, navigating this. And I just feel that some of the IRB ethical review processes are kind of undersell some of the challenges in this space and some of the urgency we need, and some of the things we should be paying attention to, frankly, as researchers. These processes don't pick up on those things, and it relies on us being good ethical researchers to do so. So the field lacks clear guidance or standards for XR ethics within research context. There's no off-the-shelf book in terms of how to do this stuff. We've been doing it for a long time, and every time we kind of have a moment, we pause, we reflect on what we've done every couple of years, and we try to produce a piece of writing and put that out into the sort of community that says these are some of the issues we've experienced, some of the challenges we've had, and this is how we've navigated them, and this is some things you should know if you're doing work in this space. But notwithstanding, researchers must proactively engage autistic groups, ensure that the autistic communities and participants have a voice. And I don't just mean a voice for people who are verbal, but people who are nonverbal. How do we engage a voice in that context? Recognize ethical risks early, respond to those, and also set standards for inclusive emerging technology applications. And this is essential, I would argue, to help ensure that XR benefits rather than marginalizes autistic communities. Thank you for listening. Questions? Any questions, or we can all just go for happy hour? There's one here. There's two here. They're both here, actually, I think.
There we go. We've been hoarding microphones at the front. So this is fantastic work. Oh, sorry. Let me not be right in front of the interpreters here. It's fantastic work, and I'm thinking a lot. We're doing right now our Metaverse Standards Forum work on accessibility standards, and I'm curious when it comes to things like sensory overstimulation. That could be really tricky in XR because, if you start off in the middle of a forest scene, you might have just this kind of calm forest all around you, but move 10 feet to your right, and all of a sudden there's like flowers right in your face. That could be really overstimulating, right? And so I'm curious for when it comes to that, when it comes to trying to provide guidelines and how we can make these spaces more accessible and reduce that risk of overstimulation, What are some of the things that you would recommend for that?
Good question. It's hard, and we talked about this. The needs of this population vary immensely. Some autistic people are sensory seeking, some are sensory avoiding. So for some people, the scenario you just painted could be great. They'd love it. Others maybe not so. It's almost impossible to know. I'm working with a researcher in Australia where we're designing sensory spaces. We've co-designed sensory spaces. And what we've done is we've just made them as adaptable as possible. So what do you need in this space to make you feel comfortable? They can select all those things and then it generates and populates those things. Even having spaces, when I worked in Second Life many years ago, just having different spaces on that island where people could get what they needed and go to where they wanted to go was important. So I guess that would be one way of addressing it. I mean, it's a hard question to answer. But from a research perspective, I think making sure that we try those things out and we're aware of the potential issues that could come up. And that again comes through more detailed training of researchers, making sure they're aware of those things. The amount of researchers I've seen put things in front of some autistic groups that I think, no, that's not going to end well. Just having that awareness, and it's difficult to build, and there is no off-the-shelf box for any of the stuff I think we've been talking about and how we design it. So it's a good question I can't really answer, basically.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, right here.
Okay. Just thinking about using VR, and thank you for being in this field for a long time. I mean, you've been in almost when it started, right? Just thinking about how to involve nonverbal people in discussions. Could XR, AR, VR actually help that? And how can we dream up to so they could really participate and really verbalize, or I don't know, communicate is a better word, in groups?
100%. The very early work, the first work I did in 2012 with Second Life, that was the whole, that provided people in a classroom situation who were collaborating and communicating in a virtual world rather than in the real world, were opened up their ability or their willingness, ability, I'm not sure what it was, to communicate. So these tools we know do open up communication channels for people who struggle to verbalize. They can communicate, they want to communicate, they sometimes just choose not to communicate. So in the way that we expect, right? Neurotypical people expect. So I think these technologies can unlock, yes, they can unlock that. And we often see a lot of unintended things happening. In some cases, when people are using VR, they actually start talking about what they're doing. They start verbalizing and communicating with, because they know someone else is in the room, and teachers report that as being really really insightful, really helpful. So, and that's why all of the research we do is outside of the research lab and in classrooms, in homes, in centers and stuff, where we can see that stuff happening and have authentic reporting of these things being important. So teachers have reported that being important. And we've had people collaborating on activities in I don't know, there's trying to think of the name, someone will know, it's when you have to decode the bomb. Yeah, you know the one. So having somebody who's, what's it called?
Yeah,
that's it.
Keep talking and no one explodes.
So,
that's a fun one.
So somebody's in the VR situation, they can see the bomb, they can see the wires, but the person can't see what they see, and they've got the instructions on how to stop the bomb blowing up. And so that's a great way that we've seen people communicate, autistic groups communicate across contexts, which has been really, again, it's been reported as positive to the teachers and other people who have seen that. Good question, sir.
I think we have time for one more over here.
There we go. It feels like you've made like real inroads to help autistic people, and autism is such a amorphous term with so many different types, flavors, whatever you want to call it. I'm intrigued as to how you have firstly been able to gain the trust of the communities, because I know myself that researchers coming into those communities can be not trusted, completely actually unwanted at times. And so how you managed to gain that trust and that communication, and also how you worked to make sure that the autism community was fairly represented as well, because not all of us are verbal. Not all of us have certain types of reactions to stimuli. And so it's how you've actually been able to accurately reflect the autistic community and make inroads with that community.
Two really good questions, thank you. And we talked a bit about that in the breakout group. I think to answer your first question, to build trust, I think, was that the first question, trust? The first thing I think is to go into this with a conversation that isn't just about the technology and wanting to test technology on people. You know, I think, because you're right, there's a report coming out of UCL that really, they talked to autistic people and asked them about researchers, and they had a really bad view of them. They were treated like subjects where you just want our data, you come and you go, you don't. So what I've tried to do is really do the opposite of what that report said, really, and think about how we can build authentic conversations and listen. Researchers don't listen that well often to these communities. Build a safe space where they feel they can come into your lab and they can share their ideas with you, where we can co-create and co-design the solutions to the challenges you have with this technology. And then at the other end, right, and we again talked about this, right through the other end of doing the research, feeding that research back into the community, making sure that we connect, follow right the way through with this stuff. We don't just stop at publication or results, we take it back into the community. And we talk about implications for what we found as well. I've given presentations on numerous occasions with my autistic collaborators, researchers. So we build an environment where we have a lab that is populated by neurodivergent people, thinkers, people who can spot things I wouldn't spot, or see things that I need to see that I wouldn't see. And being a reflective researcher, not, you know, I don't profess to know all of this, you know, I certainly don't. So I think just approaching it in that way. And when we develop collaborations with schools or other organizations, spending time in those organizations, spending time being in those spaces, being observant of what's happening, and also being able to read, you know, what sort of space is this, and what type of, how do I need to kind of articulate in this space, I guess, has been really important. But I've always found the circling back and making sure this is a 360 process rather than a 180 has been helpful. But thank you for raising that really important question, because the mistrust has been problematic. I think as researchers, we always struggle to find participants in our research, you know, and so to be authentic and to be value driven as well, and making sure you share those values with the community can be important to get them on board too. Thank you for asking that important question.
Another round of applause for Nigel. Thank you. All right, so let me grab my clicker. That is going to bring us to you can grab that with you. The end of day one here. I want to thank again everybody for coming out, for participating, for bringing your attention, for bringing your discussion, and for bringing your energy and your interest in making these technologies a more inclusive and more accessible set. I'm going to give you a little sneak preview here of day two. We're going to be having a really jam-packed first half. We're only going to 1 p.m. tomorrow, but we're going to open at 9 and then get right into it at 9:10 with AI advancement in wearable and MR technology from our friends at Meta. Then we have aesthetic access for VR centering disabled artistry. We have accessibility innovations for extended reality, drama, and documentary. There's going to an hour and a half for our snack break and exhibit part 2, accessibility boogaloo. I'll also note tomorrow that we are going to open the poll for best exhibits. So you can vote for your top 3 posters and your top 3 demos. And we'll be giving out some lovely certificates to the winner of that. 11:40, we're going to be coming back and having the talk who won the award for longest title. I4AD, Diverse Perspectives from BLV Users on Designing Audio Description Frameworks for VR Musical Performances. Say that 10 times fast. At noon, we have Exploring Cognitive Accessibility and Mixed Reality for People with Dementia. Although I do believe, unfortunately, that speaker could not make it, so we'll just have a short message from her instead. 12:20, we'll have Immersive Environments for Resettlement, and then we'll finish it off with a little bit of news about kind of what's coming next for from XR Access. So with that, we'll release everybody for cocktails and such, or your preferred diversion. If anybody does want, we did have a bit of a tradition, which I imagine we won't be doing tomorrow since we're out at 1 p.m., but the Graduate Hotel across the way has a panorama room rooftop bar that is quite lovely. But regardless, everybody enjoys your evening. We'll see you back here at 9 a.m. tomorrow.